the worst case of psycho overprotective parenting that you've ever seen? Story 1. I went to high school with a guy whose parents had a camera installed in his room that fed into a TV screen in their bedroom. When he told me, I assumed it was one of those things they used when he was a baby, then disabled when he was older. Nope. According to him, they still kept it on 247, even though he was like 17 years old. I'd never been so creeped out. Story 2. My aunt won't let her kids open their own soda cans because she thinks they'll cut their fingers off, which was fine when they were young, but they're 15 and 18 now. Story 3. My ex's mom screamed in my face legit inches from my face that I was stealing her son away when he bought his house. It was his decision to buy a house, and he had wanted me to live with him. The location of the house, you ask? Directly across the street from where his parents live. Story 4. I had an ex-boyfriend from high school whose parents were very strict about him dating. So we always had group dates. We weren't allowed to be alone. We went over to his house for a movie night and everyone all of a sudden left. But it was super late and my dad's place was across town. So I called for him to pick me up. But it was going to take 45 minutes to get there. His parents made me wait outside on the porch alone in November in Canada. It was cold. He wasn't allowed to wait outside with me. They didn't even let me wait in the foyer with them supervising. Story 5. My former roommate's parents were extremely protective of my roommate. Once I woke up to 3 calls and 4 texts from her mom asking if my roommate was in the room. I replied back, yes. Later that day, my roommate explained to me that there was a girl murdered in North Carolina that fit her description and her parents wanted to make sure she was alive. We go to school over 400 miles away from North Carolina. Story 6. Girl at school wasn't allowed any sugar, no sweets, not even fruit. It was weird. I invited her to a party at mine and her parents came round before the party to check our house was safe. They asked if our gate locked to keep people out. It wasn't fair on her though. Every birthday or party she'd eat tons of junk food and feel ill, and she used to crawl around the classroom pretending she was a cat. I think they broke her. Story 7. My first boyfriend in high school practically lived at our house because my mother refused to let me go to his. He was over every day after school and most weekends. Finally, I convinced her to let me drive myself to his house. At this point, I had met his dad twice, and his dad thought he did something to offend me, scare me off because I never came to visit them. I really wanted to go hang out with him and his dad. So I drove myself to his house, with the condition that I call my mother immediately upon arrival from their phone. Google Maps said it should take 8 minutes to get there. 8 minutes and 45 seconds later, I get an enraged phone call from my mom. I was just walking in the door and I hadn't called her yet. She made me immediately return home and grounded me from my cell phone for a month. Story 8. I was TA-ing a general chemistry lab in college and a parent emailed me after the first lab report with an annotated copy of the graded assignment, which I gave a B. Little Johnny had never gotten a B in a class before, and I was just being unfair since it was his first semester in college. Long story short, she threatened to go to the prof. I said go ahead, and they did. The professor was awesome. When kids about their grades, he offers them a regrade, and then goes over the report with a fine-toothed comb. The B got changed to a C, edit. The student was the one who ultimately asked for the regrade. Would he have asked for one if his parents didn't make a stink? Maybe. Maybe not. It doesn't matter. Part of being in college is learning how to take responsibility for your actions. And there's a reason professors rely on TAs for grading freshman lab assignments. Their time and attention is better spent elsewhere. Asking the professor for a personal regrade must carry downside risk. Otherwise, everyone would ask for one every time. Please feel free to question the grader on anything. That's part of their job too. Just make sure you have a solid case before requesting a formal regrade. Story 9. One time, when I was about 6, I was playing on a playground. Anyway, I went down this tube slide thing. It was totally covered, and this little girl walked in front of it. Well, surprise, surprise, I hit her. Her mother got super mad at me and told me that I should pay more attention in the future. I was on a slide. I had a friend growing up whose mom refused to send out a Christmas card with her and her brother's photos on it. The mom was convinced at the end of the season, once people threw away the cards, the garbage man or anyone rifling through the trash would see her amazing, beautiful children, find the address on the discarded envelope, and come kidnap the kids from their home. She did many other bizarre things, but that one always stuck out to me. Story 10. I once dated a girl with absolutely insane parents. Throughout middle and high school, they refused to let her go out to anything but school and choir trips. She had to argue and bargain with them for months just to be able to go to senior prom. They wouldn't let her go to junior prom. They also refused to let her get a driver's license or a car to limit her mobility. Even to this day, they refuse to let her go out. She, a 20-year-old woman, has to get permission from her super restrictive mom and dad to go out for coffee at the cafe downstairs. The worst part of all of this is that she can't move out, as they have hold of her passport and where she lives. It's more or less impossible to get anything done without it. Edit. To all of you talking about the legality of withholding her passport, I don't know for sure whether it is or not. The laws where I lived sometimes had really backwards policies. I have advised her to try to take action, escape many times, but for personal reasons she has decided not to. I disagree entirely with her choice, but it's her choice to make, not mine. Edit 2. While I love your guys' concern and willingness to help, I will not be giving out information that can be used to identify her, for reasons listed in the above edit, so please don't ask. Story 11. On my friend's 13th birthday, his big brother was taking us paintballing. We said bye to his mom. She was, in full disclosure, a severe paranoid schizophrenic who liked to go off her meds. Anywho, we left the house and headed to paintball. At a random gas station a good half-hour away, we stopped for snacks. When the older brother goes inside, the mom pulls up to a screeching halt next to us, rolls down the window and starts yelling at us to make sure the older brother spends all the money on paintball, rocking the crazy eyes the whole time. She leaves by rolling around to the back of the gas station and idling there. When the older brother got back, we told him what was going on. He told us to buckle up. Sure enough, we pulled out of the gas station and she starts to try tailing us. I say try, because next thing I know, we're on the freeway doing at least 100 dodging from lane to lane till we found a quick off-ramp that took us under a bridge where we hid for a few minutes to make sure we had lost her. The older brother refused to let her ruin my friend's 13th birthday. He was a good dude. Story 12. I once went to bed with a very beautiful girl who happened to be homeschooled as a child until she was 13 before she went to public school. It happened 3 separate occasions that we were in the middle of fooling around, and then she would just hit a wall and stop moving forward, and so I would stop. She explained the attitudes that she grew up with about, and she would just clamp up and be on the brink of tears, and I would just be telling her it was fine and not to be embarrassed. It just blew my mind that at 24, this beautiful, young, well-traveled, educated woman still couldn't be physically intimate with someone past a certain point because of some mental block her parents had instilled in her. Shit's weird. Parents need to stop teaching their daughters dumb about. If not for the sake of their self-confidence issues, then at least to stop cock-blocking me. Story 13. A girl I know didn't get the talk from her parents until she was 18 or 19. Her mom had decided that if she didn't know what was, she would keep her virginity forever or something. Story 14. My first roommate in college was extremely coddled by his mother, or at least I thought so. His home was about an hour away from campus, and she came up every day to get his laundry and make his bed, clean his side of the room. They were both neat freaks, and I wasn't a slob by any means, but I wasn't quite as neat as either them would have liked. What ended up happening is, I would come back from class and find her making my bed, organizing my desk, and picking up my dirty clothes. Didn't really appreciate that, but I didn't want to make waves, so I just kept my mouth shut. Finally, it got really weird when I came back to the room after a class had gotten canceled and they were both in the same twin bed. He was sleeping and she was stroking his hair face and singing him a lullaby. Story 15. My wife's mother. Too many acts of lunacy to mention, but the one that sticks out was when we went to their house for a family barbecue. We were in our mid-20s. Mom decides to start a fight over my presence, as I wasn't family and thus should not be attending. Wife says if he's not welcome, we're leaving. Mom says, no, you're not. You're grounded. Wife just gives her this tilt your head sideways look and says, we're going back to our house. Story 16. I work security at a college, so I've seen my fair share. This wasn't so much overprotective as it was babying. I once had a mother call our office. The exchange went as follows. Mother, hello, can you please go tell my son's professor that he won't be in class today? He doesn't feel well. Me, where is your son? Mother, oh, has there, on campus, in the dorms. Me, Mom, I don't know who your son's professor is, and even if I did, it's his responsibility to get in touch with them, not mine or yours. Mother, oh, I know, but he called me and asked me to call him out of class. Me, he's in college now. He's 18. He can do this on his own. He doesn't even need to call. He can email his professor. Her laughing, you're so right. Story 17. I know someone who just moved into her college dorm a couple weeks ago. This girl has never had a house key as her mom wouldn't allow it. If she wanted in the house, mom better be there. Her parents also have all of her social media passwords, and her mom openly states she used to go read the chat conversations. Not as bad as others. However, the girl has already been home one weekend and is set to come back in a few weeks. We were all wondering how she'll rebel once she's under the college experience. This girl's brother, who is in middle school, maybe just started high school, is worse. He is so coddled that he freaked out when he was left in a waiting room at a doctor's office alone while his uncle went back for his appointment. The kid could not be left alone. For the record, neither kid is special needs. Story 18. Wife grew up in a quiverful family. She was only allowed to wear ankle-length skirts, no movies any time, only parental-approved books, Pilgrim's Progress, the Bible, theology books, no music except for classical and hymns. In order to date her, I had to court her. That involved never being alone, her parents inviting themselves to our anniversary dinners, siblings repeating every word that we said back to her parents. I gave her a goodbye hug, and her mother yelled at her, calling her a loose woman. When she finally gave up and ran away, they chased her to her car screaming and tried to block her in the driveway with a tractor. Story 19. I graduated high school a year and a few months ago. A good friend of mine was a freshman my senior year. Now she's a junior and taking college classes at my college. She's not allowed to talk to me because I graduated. She still does in person, but not as much as we used to be able to. Story 20. I don't know if it's the worst case, but I take my two kids to the park, 2 and 5 years old, and get the side-eye from moms like I'm hovering over their kids on the playground. No. I have to make sure my 2-year-old doesn't decide she's going down the fire pole. Stop treating all dudes like pedo lurkers. Story 21. I got one. My sister once told me about this one time when she was at a beach house with her friends. They were all over 20 years old, and they were planning to stay there for the weekend. Obviously, they were going to stay up all night watching movies when midnight strikes. This one girl's phone starts to ring, and it was her mother telling her to go to sleep. Worst part? She silently stood up and went to bed. She is over 20 years old. Story 22. I don't know about the worst, since my parents were pretty good about other stuff, but anything to do with was a major no-go. I remember them trying to give the talk to my oldest sister, who was 8 or 9 at the time, making me 4 or 5. We got to the part where the guy puts the thing he pees out of into a hole I was not aware existed, and I ran away screaming. That subject was never revisited. They pulled me out of middle school ed because it was too early, and my high school taught abstinence. I thought that all, not just child pornography, was illegal until college. Story 23. When I was in college, I was dating a girl and had been for some time. My dad lived in another state, and we had made plans to go visit him so she could meet him for the first time. The day we were supposed to leave, like 2 hours before we left town, she got her grades from her college. They weren't as good as her parents wanted, so they grounded her. I went to her house to try to reason with her mom I should have bailed at that red flag, but I was in love and her mom was so condescending. I explained how my dad and stepmom had made arrangements for her to be there and how excited they were to meet her. She wouldn't hear it. I made the mistake of saying, I understand that you're upset, but deciding this right before the trip just seems childish. I was banned from their house. We were actually together for a long time after that, but I know they're still really overprotective, and she's really dependent on them. She's 31, and the last time I talked to her a few months back, she still lived with them. Story 24. My dad would lock me in the house like it's a prison. He never let me play outside with the other kids. The only time I go outside is when I went to school, and even then he wouldn't let me participate in extracurricular activities. He would always hang around the school. I was such a depressed, lonely child. I had a 9:30 p.m. curfew until I was 19. The only friend I had was my dog. I loved that dog so much, but my dad killed him in a drunken and coke-fueled rage. He stomped the dog to death, then hid the body somewhere in the woods where no one would find it. He killed the dog because he said the dog was being violent and aggressive because it's in the nature of all pit bulls. That's bullshit. My dog was the sweetest, most loving dog ever. He loves everyone and everything. I think he did it because he knew that dog made me happy. On a positive note, my father is currently in prison for 35 years for statutory rape, possession of cocaine, domestic assault, and child abuse. My mom was too afraid to say or do anything. She got so traumatized and depressed she stopped caring about anything, including her son. She is still emotionally scarred just like me, but we're slowly but surely recovering. Story 25. Yes, I've been waiting for this. So I met my wife on OkCupid. We were about 21 at the time. I came into her life at a bad moment. She was failing classes, anxiety-prone, etc. Eventually, she got asked to take a leave of absence from her school. Against my better advice, she didn't tell her parents, went back to the school to pack up her stuff and figure out what her next move was. Well, her parents found out within that next day or so, and her dad flew some odd 1,000 miles to get her and go back home. But this was the next thing. They cut her off from the world. She couldn't go out of the house unless it was to the schools that they enrolled her in to get her back in good standing. She dropped off the face of the earth. Her mom spent time writing all of her friends pretending to be her, stating that they could not be friends and that she was moving on with her life. Her mom did the same to me. Eventually, I got a hold of her, and we had to talk secret for months on end. We started dating, and she graduated, and we kept talking. Well, she finally moves out of her parents' house and comes to visit me some 1,000 miles away. Her parents cut her cell phone off. When she gets back to her hometown, they demand she comes over. They confiscate some items of hers that I gave her and told her to never speak to me again. That doesn't work, of course. Eventually, we say it because they are bat crazy. We're talking the mother mailing me that she knew who many managers were and could call them and let them some craziness and get married. When we finally tell them, which is like a month or two after it happens, the mom played the victim like we didn't even give her the chance to get to know me and to like me. And I'm just like, you impersonated your daughter and told me that you wanted nothing to do with me. Your daughter told you that we would be together and you threatened to disown her. As you could see, this completely works me up. Nonetheless, now the mother refuses to speak either of us, has manipulated the ballless father into not speaking to his own child, and the teenaged younger sister thinks that my wife is the world's most awful person for choosing to live her life. For sake. When I was doing freshman orientation years ago at college, the tour guide told a story when we got to the dorms. The head RA for a freshman dorm got a knock on her office door about 2-ish months into the first semester, right before midterms. A girl walked in and asked what was the longest amount of time guests were allowed to stay in the room. The RA told her can't remember the amount of days, and the girl says that her roommate's mother had been living in the room since move-in weekend. Holy no. Story 26. I was friends in high school with this kid. We'll call him Zach. Zach's parents were super Christian and conservative. They never let him play video games or watch anything other than kids' shows. They also refused to let him go to ed. When he was 19, he called me in the middle of the night because his girlfriend wanted pads for her period, but he had no idea what those were. If they found out he had played video games at a friend's house, they would ground him. He wasn't allowed to be out anywhere after 7, unless he was with his parents. When he was 19 and living away from his parents, they called him and demanded he stop talking to his gay friend. The end result was the most sheltered, ignorant human being I have ever met. Don't even get me started on the parents themselves. They never got him vaccinated and barely went to the doctor themselves. They were anti-abortion, gay rights, not just marriage, rights, and anti-immigration. Once they found out me and my family were Muslim, they tried their best to keep me and their son separated. Story 27. My mother signed me out of high school, and I was not allowed out of the house for almost 2 years. She quit her job and was convinced the Asian mafia was going to kill us. I wasn't allowed near windows to get the mail, nothing. But my siblings came and went as they pleased. To this day, I do not understand. Story 28. Kid I went to high school with was constantly grounded, and for really dumb things as far as I can tell. He hardly got to come out and do stuff around the neighborhood. It seemed pretty crazy at the time, but I guess not psycho based on what I know can happen. Story 29. My boss has a baby and a 4-year-old, and they are super overprotective. Like, the 4-year-old still sleeps in their bed with them and the baby, and they haven't left either kid alone with another person ever. Sometimes he talks about how they've never been out since the kids, like I can relate. I have a pair myself, but we still live our lives. The 4-year-old went to preschool, so the mom went with him and sat in the class every day. and even sat at his table and played with him instead of letting him interact with peers. One time they were in the office and my boss hand-fed him food because he didn't want the kid handling the food himself, since the kid had recently touched the computer. Recently, he was describing their garden and how the food at the back never gets picked because we can't go back there ever because of the baby. You know? No, I have no idea. You live on a small fenced lot in the suburbs. What are you afraid of getting to your baby if you walk out to the corner of your yard? The worst part is, he's constantly telling me how tired he is and how his kids never sleep. But it's probably because they're all sleeping in the same bed, waking each other up all the time. Both of my kids were in their own room by a couple of months old, and it made life so much easier. When they're in the room with you, you notice every little noise. Story 30. Well, there's this new popular post making the rounds on Facebook about how when on the street you must carry your child in your arms at all times. Never let him walk. Not even if you're holding his hand or on a leash, as it makes them too easy targets for snatching. And obviously never take them out to play. You'd have to let them do stuff and it's too dangerous. It also has a couple extra interesting advice. You should make posts of any person that seems to be lingering about. They're probably kidnappers looking at your kids. I've also seen several posts of random people on stores because someone thought they looked suspicious. More so if they're males buying stuff that only women are supposed to buy, like fabrics or cleaning supplies. If you ever lose sight of your child, immediately consider it a kidnapping. Edit looking for the post. In the meantime, this is the new warning. Sorry, it's in Spanish, but it tells you to never go to the supermarket alone with your kids ages 1 through 20. Always bring along the father, as you can't be constantly holding him, since you might need to let go of him to push the cart or grab stuff. Edit to print this page to add your child's personal info, fingerprints, and some hair clips for DNA identification. Carry it with you always to have everything ready if your child is kidnapped. Story 31. Live in Midwest and have several 12-year-old girl lives next door to me. For our summer block party, the parents drive 4 houses up the street to attend. At sunset, the wife screamed murder at their daughter to stop playing so they could go home and put on long sleeves pants and prevent mosquito bites. It was like 100 degrees out, so I'd choose bug bites over pants and long sleeves any day. Mosquitoes can also bite their clothes, so I'm not sure what they were solving. Drove her back to house 4 houses down, changed, then came back. Same wife made her husband leave about 1 hour after they returned because he had had 3 beers over 5 hours, and she doesn't allow him to have more than 3. 2A girlfriend's parents were very strict, not religious, just crazy. They would only let her ride her bike around in their yard regardless of age because there was a highway nearby. This was in rural Missouri, about 2 hours from a major city in a town of about 2,000 people. They highway was miles per hour rural highway that has hardly anybody driving on it. My parents are super strict with me. I am the youngest of 3. There is an age gap of 12 and 10 between my older siblings and I. My parents were not really strict with my older siblings as they are with me. I can understand why, because my sister ran off and got married and pregnant. She is now in an abusive relationship that is very much poisonous. My brother is clinically depressed and spends his days at work or in his room. I understand the reasons why my parents want to keep a close leash on me, but sometimes I feel very suffocated. I was not allowed to go to the mall with my friends alone until I was 17 years old. I would always have to beg my parents to let me go to the school dances and school events. My brother and my sister even agree with my parents about not letting me go anywhere. I feel like this way of living has taken a toll on my life. I live in America, and I would always see my friends hanging out with each other at the mall or at a restaurant. They would post it on Facebook and would always wish that it was me who was able to hang out with friends. I would just lay in bed all day and not do anything productive. Eventually, when I did start going out with friends, my mom would only let me leave for 3 hours at a time. She would start calling me and blowing not only my phone, but also my friend's phone. I was really embarrassed, so I just never went out. I developed anxiety from this, which I still suffer from. Bottom line, let your kids have some fun and just trust them that they are going to do the right thing. Story 32. A friend of mine had very overprotective and religious parents. He didn't have a door on his bedroom or bathroom. When you went over there, you had to take your shoes and socks off. I understand shoes, but how are socks any more dirty than bare feet? He never got dropped anywhere either. Always had mom or dad there. Story 33. Around the middle of my first semester of college, I lost my phone. I noticed it was missing around when I got back to my dorm. Thinking that I left it in one of my classrooms, I called it from a friend's phone. A classmate who lives off campus had found it. He took it home because he knew it was mine and was going to give it back next Monday during class. And that was that. I would get my phone on Monday, so problem solved. Boy, was I wrong. Because he turned off the phone after that call, my mother couldn't get a hold of me. My mom, being my mom, assumed I was dead in a crack house after doing too many drugs. The lunatic took a plane and flew from Panama to DC just so she could make sure I was okay. Halfway across the continent just so she could ask one question. Keep in mind, my best friend and 4 other high school friends were attending the same college as me and lived in the same dorm building as me, and she had all their phone numbers. Also, to make matters worse, that was not the last time she took an 8-hour flight just to make sure I was okay. Story 34. Oh, I got one right for this one. I've mentioned it before in some other threads, but I just can't get over how batshit insane this woman is. A good friend of mine has lived with his grandparents his whole life. It's just his grandma now, and she's insanity turned to 11. I've known this guy since high school. It took 4 years before I was allowed to go into his house because his grandma didn't like the fact I have long hair. She didn't want a hippie in the house. When he did leave the house, she would call around 8 to 9 p.m. and ask when he's going to be home. Well, I use ask loosely. It was more like pestering him that he needs to get home. She continues to call every 30 minutes or so. There's been no repercussions from him completely ignoring this, though. When she goes out of the house, he has to go with her. I understand she may have a fear of going out alone, and that's probably bolstered a bit by her watching of Fox News, but they live in a very, very low crime area. There's been one shooting in the last decade, no muggings, armed robberies of people, and the only thing the cops really have to respond to are people stealing from Walmart. His car got totaled 2 years ago. He still doesn't have another one because she won't let him save the money to get another one. He always has to pay vast majority of bills and rent, despite her being fully able to pay her share as well. He can't just refuse because she'll eventually kick him out, and that threat holds more weight now since he doesn't have a car. He's using hers to go back and forth to work. Several years back we went on vacation and she told us not to go to a place that was on our agenda because it was a bad area. We told her we wouldn't. Of course, we did anyway, and surprise, not a single problem at all. Can't have any alcohol, he sneaks it in anyway, has to leave the door to his room open, and no bad language. In all honesty, she treats him like a 12-year-old. He's in his upper 20s. Story 35. I already said something about the family in a previous thread, but I still have a good answer and sweet karma, am I right? Anyway, there was this family of 2 parents and 4 kids that had the most overprotective health nut mom ever, and she also was a very strict conservative Christian. Their dad wasn't the same way, but he pretty much allowed her to be strict like she was. She wouldn't let her kids do things that most normal kids were allowed to do, like eat any food that wasn't organic and wholesome. She believed that GMO and HCF caused bad problems later in life. She also hated microwaves and wouldn't let her kids use them. Watch anything with any hint of the supernatural that didn't have to do with God. So that meant no Disney princesses, no Star Wars, no Harry Potter, no Lord of the Rings. No celebrating Christmas or Halloween. Those are pagan holidays. No violence or swearing or in anything. My friend from that family had a GameCube with a few games on it. He used to have Super Smash Bros. Melee, but his mom took Smash Bros. Because it was too violent for him. I feel sorry for her kids. I know the oldest boy is going to be far from the perfect kid his mom wants him to be, and the girls will probably follow suit. I know when I have kids, I will not be the same way. Story 36. I used to work in the post office of a university. We would encounter helicopter parents from time to time. I remember getting a phone call from some student's mother. She wanted to understand our procedures in detail. What happens when a student gets a package that's too big to fit in his mailbox, etc. After much discussion, I asked her, "Why do you need to know this?" Turns out she wanted to know so she could explain it to her son. I also took a phone call from another mother who listed a lot of rambling complaints about the university, most of which shouldn't have concerned me in the first place because they had nothing to do with my department. But one of her allegations was that her daughter had been harassed while working in the cafeteria. I figured this was serious, so I wrote down the details and reported it to my boss, who made some inquiries. It turns out the university had already heard this story from the mother, but had not taken any action because the student herself had refused to file a complaint. Only the mother had complained. So now, the mother, after having already complained, and not getting satisfaction for good reason, had decided to repeat her complaint to the post office. Story 37. My friend's mom. They're great people and I love them like a second family, but she was overprotective. Fourth grade, his mom cut the tail off of the Nightcrawler action figure I got him for his birthday for being demonic. Fifth grade, she throws away the medieval Spawn action figure I got him for being Spawn. High school, she throws away the vintage Faster Pussycat shirt I gave him. His dad's cool though. He'd watch Beavis and With Us when we were 10. My sister was by far the worst I've ever met. She was a typical shitty teenager in high school doing the whole I'm 17, I'm grown. You can tell me what to do thing, including drinking, drugs, and none of which I have any problem with, but probably aren't a good idea if you don't possess the responsibility to deal with them. She got knocked up at 17 by a dude who bailed on her, and she took about 1.5 tons of reality to the face and decided to turn her life around. Problem is, she swung too far back in the other direction and became a super fundamentalist Christian and chalked her getting knocked up by a transient Mexican farm worker and literally everything else to God's plan. After my nephew was born, things didn't start to get bad until he was around 7 or 8 and developed his own personality. She started forcing him to go to church and catechism against his wishes. She also severely restricted the information and media he was allowed access to. Books were restricted solely to the Bible and other religious texts, and educational books so long as they didn't contradict scripture in any way. She refused to allow him to have friends unless she'd vetted them and ensured they came from a good Christian family. Until he was 16, the only television he was allowed to watch was Disney Channel and CNN. She put parental block on everything else. He wasn't allowed to see movies rated above PG or get his driver's license until he was 18, and she couldn't really stop him anymore. Video games were right out of the question. The end result of his sheltered upbringing was that, as soon as he was a legal adult, he began to rebel against everything she'd ever imposed on him in whatever way he could find. He started drinking and doing drugs, stopped going to church or any of the religious studies groups she made him go to, and fell in with a group of guys who got him in a fair amount of trouble. Thankfully, he's calmed down recently, in his early 20s. Has in college now, still drinks and smokes weed, but not nearly as much as he used to, and to my knowledge, hasn't committed a crime in a few years. Story 38. My co-worker has made her poor 13-year-old terrified of the world. Co-worker proudly brags about how she has always told her daughter to never allow herself to be alone at any time because the world is full of murder rapists lurking around every corner just waiting to kidnap her. As a result, the daughter is an absolute nervous wreck at all times. The daughter calls my co-worker every morning before she leaves for the school bus in tears because she has to walk half a block to the bus stop by herself. Then she'll call every afternoon crying hysterically because she has to walk home from the bus by herself and let herself into the house. She's terrified of everything. Every noise is Simone trying to break in. She'll call her mom freaking out about seeing a car drive down the road that she didn't recognize. I feel bad for the poor girl. Imagine being thoroughly convinced that you'll be kidnapped and raped and murdered any second, every day. So sad. Edit, I don't care what all you people think of me for not calling CPS. Clearly none of you ever dealt with them. The bottom line is that a call to CPS will do nothing to help this kid. She's not being hit, she's not being molested, and she's not being neglected. They will not do anything. The only thing a call to CPS would do in this case is turn her mother's paranoia up to 11. If I thought it would actually help, I would call. I'm not a monster. I don't need to feel guilty or blame myself over choosing to not make this girl's life even more of a nightmare than it already is. If she was being hit, neglected, or molested, maybe it would help to call. And I would. CPS is not the all-powerful, fix-everything-after-one-tip institution you all seem to think it is. The abuse neglect needs to be obvious, provable, and extreme in order for them to intervene in any meaningful way. And the older the child is, the less likely they are to get help at all. CPS is designed to keep families together. Ask any social worker how they feel about CPS, and I guarantee you they will have dozens of stories about how unhelpful CPS actually is. I refuse to give her mother the push she needs to lock that poor child in the house until she's 18, like some kind of actually afraid of the world Mother Gothel. Story 39. I stopped inviting my son's friend over because his mother had so many rules. He could not eat hot dogs or grapes, choking hazard. No hamburgers at restaurants or at our house because they might not be cooked through. No playing outside without an adult present to watch. This was through 6th grade even. I could go on, Shed email us during the school pancake feed fundraiser to tell us that she was watching and thought they probably kept the batter cold enough to prevent salmonella, so it's okay that our son ate the pancakes. That kind of thing. The great thing is, her kid was really pretty normal. In contrast, I invited another friend over for him, and they were outside monkeying around and got a kite caught in the tree. His mom came to get him, saw it up there, scoffed at their efforts to fish it out with a rake, and ordered her son to climb up and get it. He hesitated, and she was like, "Get up there." So he scrabbled up there like a monkey while I thought, yes, this is a normal childhood. Story 40. My first girlfriend by far. I met her at a dance, so I was surprised to find that her parents expressly forbid her from doing anything after school except extracurriculars. In 2 months, I never went on a single date with her. We broke up the day of the night I was going to meet her parents, at the school, and she still managed to cheat on me 3 times. Story 41. The people I babysit for. Oh God. I could tell 1,000 stories. The kids just turned 9-10. I was reprimanded by the father for letting them sit in the YMCA lobby unattended while I went out to my car to get something. Also, they live in a cul-de-sac with a giant yard that's shared with all the neighbors. There are kids out there every day. They're not allowed to play with them. They have to stay inside and read. IMO kids should regularly get cuts and bruises from playing outside. These kids freak out if they get a scratch. We were at the park and the little girl picked a bug bite and it started bleeding. She freaked out. "I need a Band-Aid." I told her I don't have any Band-Aids, Shell Live. She cried, from a tiny dot of blood. The children are not allowed to say under any circumstances. They can't watch Nickelodeon. Only PBS kids. I was spoken to for allowing one of them to take out a SpongeBob book from the library. Give me a break. Story 42. My best childhood friend mom was an overprotective. After his dad left him, she practically went insane. She went and enrolled him in counseling before putting him on a ton of psych meds, some of which being her own meds not prescribed by a doctor. One night he locked himself in his room to Skype his dad. He left his mom because she was overprotective, and his mom came upstairs and busted down his door with a chair or some, and took his laptop away and told him he was never supposed to talk to his dad ever again. So he threatened to run away or kill himself. So she sent him to a mental rehabilitation camp for about a year. After he got home, he was extremely depressed, and told me when we were alone that he never wanted to stay with his mom ever again. Then about a month later, he packed his stuff and had printed out legit adoption papers and was planning to run away to my house and let my parents adopt him. His mom caught him and drugged him with a heavy sedative for their dog who had just gotten surgery. She called an ambulance and had him moved to a mental asylum where he still is today and will be till 2017. I get to see him about once a year on his birthday when my mom drives me up to see him. It is really sad because he is a normal kid, just with a super overprotective mother. And she has ruined his life. When he gets out, I will be going into my freshman year of college and am planning to pick him up and never take him back to his mom. Take him in as a little brother. Story 43. My friend is a professor and just had a grad student's mom call him about how, if her son couldn't get into his course this semester, it would ruin his future because insert long email here. Again, this is a graduate student, not even bachelor's. How? Why? How? Who? Ugh. Story 44. Stop. Stop. Do not fall into the Reddit coma. I have been trapped in this thread for 3 hours and only have the willpower to leave now because I have to use the bathroom. Don't read further, or you will be sucked into the lives of others that are truly up. Story 45. My aunt doesn't let my cousin run. My cousin is asthmatic, so obviously there have to be some precautions. But no running whatsoever. My aunt even went as far as telling my cousin that she had a dead lung a lie, and she could kill the other one if she ran and did exercises and even lie. As you can guess, my cousin is growing up to be a chubby, scared girl. Story 46. At college orientation, they had all of us incoming freshmen and our parents in a huge auditorium. After the presentation on stuff we needed to know due prior to the start of the school year, they opened it up for QA, So they call on this woman who raised her hand. And this woman who was dead center in this huge auditorium stands up and proceeds to ramble on and on and on in a quivering voice, soon reduced to all-out tears, about all of her fears of all the horrible things that might happen to her son while he's at college. What if he's in the hospital and she's never notified and her son is dying without her by his side? What if he falls out of his bunk bed and is unconscious in his dorm room and the university doesn't notice he's missing? What if? What if? Etc., etc. It's this super nerdy, nervous mother hen type woman. Her husband and her poor, poor son are shrinking down in their chairs. The poor son doesn't take his eyes off of his feet the whole time. I felt so very bad for that poor boy. Starting college is nerve-wracking enough, and here this poor kid gets to start off his college experience by possibly being known as that kid with the overprotective, hysterical mother at orientation. Story 47. I had a couple of sisters that worked for me. They were from a pretty strict Southern Baptist family. They wore floor-length skirts, etc. Anyway, the youngest of the two was a very avid reader. She was always looking for new stuff to read, but her parents were super strict about what she could read. So she read a lot of Narnia, LOTR, other fiction with strong religious undertones. I grew up in a strict Baptist home too. I felt like I knew what she was going through. We got to talking about books one day, and I told her that she had to read To Kill a Mockingbird, as it was a classic that should be read by anyone who loved books. I brought her my copy from home and gave it to her to borrow. The very next day, she returned it and said that her parents wouldn't let her read it because it had the word kill in the title and that she wasn't allowed to read gratuitously violent books. Story 48. Asked a kid I used to be friends with way back when we were friends if he wanted to stay over my house and pull an all-nighter playing Xbox. His mom wouldn't let him because we hunt and have guns in the house. Any guns in the house are locked up and hidden away from reach of anyone but my dad, and my dad doesn't murder children. Story 49. My friend has to be home before 8 p.m., maybe 9 p.m. every night. Can't go out on Sundays because of church. Can't date anyone. Can't move out because his parents would take his car, his job, family business, his school funding, and completely cut him off. He is 21 years old. He once told me that his parents sat him down and had a serious discussion about why his credit score was 666. Yep, story 50. I don't know if this qualifies, but here you go. I was walking slowly down the street when I saw a whale-sized woman, sorry, it's adequate in this case, around in her 40s, accompanied by super thin teen girl. The woman was nearly shouting to her smartphone. She didn't look poor, and girl was quietly walking with head down. Then she saw ice cream stand. Her face lit up, she asked her mother if she can eat one, and after getting a nod and remark that she is allowed only one scoop, she happily run to the stand, pulling some change from her pocket, not purse or anything like that. When she ran, I actually saw that she wasn't thin. She was Auschwitz thin. I bet her ribs were clanking each step. As soon as she got her ice cream, she started licking it like it was antidote for a poison. She managed to lick a third of the scoop when the mother came up to her, said, "Enough. I won't allow you to repeat my mistakes," and just wrenched the cone from kid's hands and pushed into her mouth in one move. Gulp later. "You can't get fat. It's unhealthy." I stopped listening her because what hit me that the girl was still smiling, from ear to ear in fact, like a Cheshire cat. She scored in the game, and she was content. Since then, every time I stretch my hand to get something sweet, I see that monster mum. I lost great deal of fat because of her, and I still wonder if this girl, I'm sorry, is still alive. There's a child I know whose mother is so overbearing. I look after the kids in church so the adults can listen and pay attention. I tried speaking to this little boy and engaging with him, but he was awfully unresponsive and uncommunicative. His mother told me he was like this, but informed me she never ever leaves him and never will. There's no wonder he doesn't respond well to others when there are no others present. She stayed for the whole session, defeating the purpose of the creche. Now is time for snacks. There are some biscuits. The boy eats his. The mother then takes him saying, "I need to wipe his hands because he's probably allergic to everything in that biscuit." Oh, is he? Don't let him have the biscuit. If he is, wiping his hands after the fact isn't going to help much. She was annoying. Story 51. One of my friends really liked Pokemon as a child. His parents tore his Pokemon cards up in front of him, burned them, and told him they represent the devil. He was like 8. Story 52, sort of related. In high school, me and my best buddy were complete delinquents, parents constantly having to pick us up from the principal's office, police, etc. One time, right before a summer started, we got in trouble for something horrible. Can't even remember what. But his mom grounded him for the whole summer. He was not allowed out of the house the whole summer. She changed the alarm code so he didn't know it. He was inside for 3 months consecutive when suddenly he got very sick. Went to the doctor and doctor told him he was lacking so much vitamin D that his immune system was taking a hit from it. They put him on vitamins to readjust his vitamin D levels. My buddy got grounded so hard he was deprived of sunlight to the extent of becoming ill from it. Story 53. Breastfeeding until the child was aged 4. The child is now 8 years old, and its mother wants to pull him out of public school because it's unsafe. I went to said public schools. It's fine. She kicked the father out because he disciplined him for putting soap in his mouth for misbehaving and arguing with him for 3 hours straight. The child isn't allowed to help with cooking. The child isn't allowed to leave the house unless with adult supervision. The child now has social development issues and is a brony. I feel bad for this kid for having freak parents. Story 54. My cousin hand-feed her son until he was 4. He was placed in a high chair and she feed him with a spoon. I was shocked and asked why. She told me that he made a mess on the floor when he fed himself. WTF? Of course he did. My kids started feeding themselves the day they ate solid food. Fine motor control is not an accident and must be practiced. I also had crayons and paper on my coffee table for 10 years. Sheesh. Side note, her son is super creepy. Long story, but I would not leave a female alone around him. Nothing concrete but big on the creepy vibes. Story 55. My girlfriend just went to college in a nearby city. Her parents constantly make her take pictures of where she is to prove that she's being good. If she studies with a guy, they call her A. Last night she didn't respond to the text telling her to send a picture because she was asleep, so her parents activated the GPS tracker on her phone to find out where she was. She was sleeping in another dorm because it was closer to where she was at the time. They threatened to pull her out of school and make her go to community college so that they can keep a closer eye on her. Every time she sends them a picture of where she is, if it's not in her dorm or a classroom, they call her the of college. She thought going to college was going to be the end of their, half venting, half response. There was a kid in the year below me in school when I was 10 who had no friends or social skills whatsoever, like he just played with a ball all day. So one day at lunch, my friend who was a bit of a snatched his ball off him to tease him, and not 1 second later did this kid's mother literally burst out of a nearby bush and screamed at my friend to give him back his ball. It was 1 p.m. She had been there all day. Story 56. My boyfriend's mom was convinced he couldn't speak due to a learning disability or developmental problem, so she took him to a specialist. He spent 10 minutes alone with him, came out and told her that yes, he could speak, but she never gave him the opportunity. She was so obsessed with anticipating his needs that he never had to ask for anything for the first few years of his life. It explains everything. Story 57. My ex and I were in college, and we both still lived with our parents. We went to school locally, and she was 19. I was 21 at the time, and they were so overprotective, and they mistrusted her so much by default that when she started middle school, every night, they would shove chairs into the door, sort of blocking the door from opening. They started doing this without her showing any inclination to sneaking out or sneaking people in as a child, and they continued to do it well into her college years. Needless to say, got weird and incredibly frustrating. Story 58. My boyfriend and I were on a cruise which stopped at multiple islands. We were in St. Kitts hanging out on the beach where they had a little open bar to get food and drinks. When we first got on the beach, we went early so we can get chairs. After 20 minutes, an older couple with a few little kids, all girls, insisted we had taken their chairs that they had previously reserved, but they had no tags on the chairs, so they walked a ways down the beach. Anyways, we're at this little tiki bar thing getting food and drinks when one of the little girls of the older couple wearing a huge bucket hat is wandering around the front of a gift shop where there were wooden stairs. All of a sudden, the little girl isn't paying attention and walks up the stairs and bumps her head on a tree and falls down 2 steps. We saw the whole time and she barely bumped her head, but as a child, I probably would have cried too. The mother ran over to the little girl screaming, Oh my God, are you all right? What happened to you? What happened? Oh my God! Totally made the situation worse, and the little girl started screaming even more. When the dad turns to us and asks if we saw anything, we just said she bumped her head and fell. No big deal. The dad literally rolled his eyes and told his wife to calm the down. Story 59. Have an acquaintance with two kids. Oldest daughter is a princess, is now 21, size 16, but thinks she's a size 4. Mother has a mental note of everyone who has missed one of her princess parties. Goes back at least 5 years. And she throws some huge parties for this ungrateful large waste of air. For every birthday for her 18th, she hired a pack of paparazzi to follow her around all day, taking pictures of her shopping and her multiple clothing changes. Graduation from high school barely made it. First day of community college lasted exactly 1 week, and whatever occasion she can throw a party for her, she does. Younger son just graduated from high school, decided to go out of state to college. With his on-again, off-again girlfriend, they are 18. He is actually taking online courses, but mama got him a 2-bedroom apartment, furnished it completely down to the silverware, and lives there 2 weeks out of the month. With her son and his girlfriend, these two people are totally incapable of doing anything on their own. Daughter thinks world revolves around her and can't understand why people don't fawn over her constantly. Son freaked out when the power went out during a storm. Needs directions texted to him because he couldn't figure out where the grocery store was. It's exhausting being around her with her phone going constantly. Oh, just remembered. She had to send a YouTube video to her son to show him how to replace the toilet paper roll. He couldn't understand her directions. Sheesh. Story 60. My father used to be a gymnastics coach and judge. One of the few people in my state that was a level 3 in both men's and women's gymnastics. What that means is that he could coach and judge regional, state, and national comps, but not international ones. At one of the regional comps my father was judging at, he was approached by one of the parents of the gymnasts, asking for her child to get at least a 9.3 to stay in her club's elite team. Her child was averaging a 9.0 across the comp. My father reported it to the head judge, and it wasn't the first time she has been warned to not approach the judges during the comp. When the session ended, the head judge called in all the judges and told them that if the woman approached them again to send her directly to the head judge. An hour into the next session, she approached another judge on the same table as my father and the head judge. She was ejected from the comp, and her child was disqualified. When parents agree to enter kids into comps, they have a page of rules they have to agree to. One of them is not to approach judges until after the awards are presented. If they do, their child may be disqualified. TLDR parent approached judge at comp asking for score to be changed for her kid several times. She gets ejected, and her kid gets disqualified. Story 61. I had just turned 18 and she was 16. We lost our virginity together. Parents threatened to call the police and have me arrested for statutory rape. They didn't like me because I had not fully planned my life yet. This was the first serious relationship I had. It kind of marked me for a long while. I honestly thought that something was wrong with me. Eventually, our relationship ended and life went on. It took me a while to believe that the parents of a new GF actually liked me for who I was, without hesitation. Edit typo. Story 62. Despite living the suburban white picket fence dream, my next-door neighbors don't let their 9-year-old out of their sight, ever. EVER. Playdates are completely supervised and rare. Roving groups of kids his age are everywhere, parks a block away in any direction, and he'll be twirling a hula hoop around alone in his backyard. When he loses a toy over the fence, he can't come to our door to ask for it back without mommy, like we're going to John Wayne Gacy him or something. I hope when he eventually murders his folks, he spares us. Story 63. When I was a senior in high school, I passed out candy on Halloween when my mom's friend brought her kids over. She had a glass of wine with my mom while her 2 kids waited impatiently to go back out trick-or-treating. After about 45 minutes and the kids constantly begging to ransack the rest of our very nice rich neighborhood, their mom agreed to let them go out by themselves while she finished her wine as long as they took a cell phone, stayed on our side of the street, and could be back in 20 minutes. This wouldn't have been weird if her kids weren't 15 and 17-year-old teenagers and not mentally or physically impaired in any way. TLDR kids not allowed to cross the street or trick or treat by themselves. Story 64. This is somewhat common, but all the same I think is psycho overprotective parenting. Purity rings and those dances that fathers and daughters go together called purity. I'm not making this up. I'm a guy, for starters, so I sort of understand my dad being nervous about me seeing anything having to do with. He was a bit of a wild child. He did every drug imaginable in late high school and college, and his friends got into lots of trouble, so I know why he was so scared I would act out and be a shitty kid like him. but I was always such a relaxed and easy child to deal with, he had no reason to be so scared. Anyway, he was super overprotective of me seeing anything. He wouldn't let me hang around with a girl at the house at all, even if he was around. He wouldn't let me see Starship Troopers when I was 15 years old because there were in it, and wouldn't let me watch a show on TBS because there were two people making out in it, fully clothed. He was like that for years, constantly screening any movie or TV show I wanted to watch. I was secretly laughing at him at the time because I cashed in my V card with both genders the year I was 15. Story 65. One of my friends absolutely has to call his parents every single day. If he can't make it one day, his parents will send him onto a guilt trip. To date, he always has to ask parents before deciding on smallest of things. He is in his 30s now. Story 66. I used to be a grocery store checker when a mother and her 5 to 6-year-old daughter came through the line. The daughter was standing upright in the grocery cart. I asked the daughter to please sit in the cart, technically still not allowed, but whatever, and the mom got mad at me for addressing her daughter directly. Standing on an unstable moving platform at age 5? Totes legit. Being spoken to by retail employees? Verboten. Story 67. My parents had software on the computer that collected everything me and my brother would ever type into it and send it in a daily email. When I found out in high school, I felt violated and upset, and that is exactly when I stopped talking to my parents about relationships. I had a boyfriend at the time, and my mother read all of our AM messages. Great. I lost a lot of trust in them for keeping that from me. It still disgusts me. My parents were always very overprotective, but this one just felt so invasive. Story 68. These homeschooled kids that used to live around the corner from me got a puppy. They invited me over to play, and I was petting and being sweet with the puppy, and said something like, "You are so cute, I could just eat you up." The parents later told me not to say things about eating their dog around their kids as I had upset them. WTF? Story 69. My grandmother was very strict with my mother and aunts. She controlled what they ate and wore and who they spoke to. They weren't allowed sleepovers or sweets or to have an opinion about anything. They were constantly punished for normal little kid behavior, having nightmares, wanting to dance, having friends until it twisted them all up. They were looking forward to college, as they were excellent students, so they could finally get away and live normal lives. My mother was told she was too immature for college and had to stay home and go to community college, even though she got a full scholarship to a 4-year school not far away. So she ran away, 3,000 miles away, and went nuts. She never went back home no matter how difficult things got because she didn't want grandma to break our spirits too. Story 70. No one will read this, but growing up in my incredibly boring suburban Atlanta neighborhood, there was a family 2 houses down that had like 6 kids, all around my age. They were rarely outside, and when they were, the mother or father had to be watching them, and they were not allowed to leave the yard or even play with other children. If anyone, and I mean anyone, was walking on the sidewalk outside when they were playing, all of them were forced inside until the person passed by. As far as I know, the only time they left the house was to go to church, since they were all homeschooled. To this day, I don't support homeschooling, no offense to anyone out there, largely due to how socially inept one of the kids was, a girl who turned out to be crazy cute that I attempted to make conversation with many times. Story 71. My daughter's friend came over for a sleepover, which was apparently a remarkable deal. My wife and I still make fun of freaky mom. The girl who was visiting was about 13. Her mom wanted to know specifics on dinner, so we'll be serving a roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans. "How much chicken do you think she's eat?" Mom asked. We didn't know. Like, as much as she wanted? We took a guess. "Will there be any sauce?" Mom asked. "Yeah, barbecue sauce." "Approximately how much sauce do you think she'll eat?" Mom asks. "How many green beans will you give her?" And the like. It was surreal. Story 72. There was a girl in my town who ended up getting a restraining order against her mother. The mother would make some sort of excuse to get into the daughter's high school, lie about her daughter having a learning disability, then sit next to her in class and make sure she wasn't talking to anyone during class or at lunch. The woman would even do things like emptying the girl's book bag and search through her things in the middle of the school. As far as I know, the girl ended up living a fairly normal life afterwards, but her mother definitely made her have some major social anxiety issues. Story 73. Oh boy, here we go. Let's talk about my sophomore year homecoming dance last year. It's a really long story, so hang on tight. Okay, so I was friends with this freshman boy named Ethan. He's a super nice guy, very funny, and very quirky. It's a month before homecoming, and he asked me, "Hey, do you want to go to HC with me just as friends?" And of course I said sure, because why not? Now it gets crazy. We exchanged our mother's phone numbers so that they could plan everything out: dinner, being brought to and from the dance, etc. So my mom calls her later that night, and the woman has planned out everything about that night in about 4 hours. Turns out she's also pregnant and due the night of the dance. Fantastic night of homecoming swings around, and his dad brings him to take pictures and bring us to dinner and then the dance. His dad is super laid back and jokes around with me and Ethan and says he's very lucky that I agreed to go with him. I thought nothing of the comment. We go to dinner and our meals were already pre-ordered and prepaid so that we could just get going when we were done. Ethan walked up to the counter and the manager, who apparently was friends with Ethan's mom, came back to our little table and said, "Your mother called for this, right?" "Yes, sir. She told me to keep an eye on you to make sure you eat everything on your plate." Ethan was embarrassed, and I didn't admit that I was getting a sneaking suspicion that something was off. We're in the middle of eating dinner and his mom keeps texting him. If he doesn't answer in 2 minutes, she calls him and screams at him. And I mean, I could hear it across the table 4 feet between us. She's yelling at him for not taking pictures of everything: our food, my corsage, our pictures from earlier, etc. It was the most awkward dinner because I couldn't even start a conversation with him without his mom calling and screaming again. So we left the restaurant after either of us barely ate our food, and we're 3 blocks from the restaurant. At this point, I feel awful for Ethan. He then errata a text from his mom, "Where's my picture with the mural?" There was a huge mural on the side of the restaurant that we were supposed to take a pic with. Oops. So we go back to the restaurant and take the picture, and he sends it to her right before she calls and screams how he's messing everything up. Jesus Christ, woman, leave him alone, he's a nervous wreck. So we get to the dance and we meet up with my best friend Marcy and her date Carl. We go out on the dance floor and Marcy and I try teaching Ethan and Carl how to dance. It doesn't go well, but it's fun to see them try. We decided we wanted to go and sit down, so we head to the rec room, where we sit with a bunch of marching band friends. Ethan checks his phone. 20 missed calls from his mom in 15 minutes, along with voicemails and texts. Great. He leaves to handle his mother while I stay with Marcy, Carl, John, who I had a crush on, and a couple others. I had a blast with them in the rec room until Carl comes back. I check the time and it's been a half hour. We all go out to the dance floor and have fun again. At some point, the rose on my corsage fell off and Marcy picked it up and asked Ethan, "What should we do with this?" And he said, "I don't really care at this point, my mother's going to kill me already," so she chucks it perfectly into the middle of the grinding circle 20 feet away. As soon as the rose goes out of sight, Ethan drops to his knees, yelling, "No, I needed a picture of that." Well, we switch between the rec room and the dance floor for the rest of the night. Ethan's constantly on his phone getting yelled at by his mom or taking pictures of the dance, so I spent most of the night with marching band friends. That part was more fun than any other part of the night. We go back to my house a couple hours after this constantly happening, and he asks if he could come upstairs for a couple more pictures for his mom. Sigh, okay, sure, I can do a couple more. So he comes inside and my mom takes more pics of us. He starts freaking out about the corsage picture again, and my mom takes a very pixelated and zoomed in picture of my wrist from one of our many photos. He says it's good enough, and he leaves. On Monday, it turns out his mom grounded him for not taking pictures of everything and not answering his phone when she called. So he didn't have a phone for a month. And that's the story of how my sophomore year homecoming was almost ruined. Story 74. Back in high school, my friend and I would regularly hang out at his place to play video games and what have you. He had a younger brother who was in middle school at the time and also had a friend come over regularly. This friend of his was the product of a super religious, super strict single mom. When he would come over, we had to hide away anything he thought his mom wouldn't want him to see or hear. It was a huge list of things, but one of the strangest things was anime. My friend's brother was an anime fan and had mangas and posters, so when he would come over, he had to take them down. A pretty funny moment with him was when my friend and I were playing the first Ninja Gaiden for the OG Xbox. He came in with his hands over his eyes and asked us to pause the game so he could get something. We obliged and waited for him to find what he was looking for and leave. But just before he left the room, I unpaused a little too early, and he witnessed Ryu cut a guy in half and a fountain of blood shoot out of him. He screamed and ran out of the room. I actually still kind of keep in contact with him. He is a lot better these days. I remember talking to him about how he was like, when he was still in middle school, he told me that he was so scared of his mom, he literally thought his mom could read his thoughts. That's why he was too scared to do anything behind her back. Story 75. A guy right next door has an overprotective mother. During weekdays, he'll be locked inside with his housemaid while both parents work. He's an only child, so he only socialized with other people at school. During weekends, his parents sent him to tons and tons of academic and non-academic courses. When we played on the street, we sometimes hear him screaming in his house when he's alone. His parents only allowed him to play with an equally academically accomplished kid next door. These two had very limited contact with other kids. Story 76. A student I tutored over the summer. I honestly felt terrible about it, but I took the job so I could be sure to take it easy on him. 15-year-old boy whose mother had him meeting with 4 tutors 3 times a week to pre-teach him his sophomore year curriculum so he could, and I quote, boost our GPA so we can get into Stanford. Eyes, what's this we? You learning to speak French? My aunt-uncle are Chabad Jews, very religious sect. They are so afraid of their children learning about the world and assimilating that they won't let them wear shirts with animals on them that are not kosher. Example, a lion. Story 77. My parents were weird. They were very strict in a lot of ways. For example, I was never allowed to listen to music that wasn't Christian until I was about a freshman in high school. I was never allowed to have a girlfriend even as a senior in high school. I still dated people, of course, but I had to sneak around and lie constantly. When I would get caught, all would break loose. My parents had all my passwords to everything social media, email, you name it. I was never allowed to have a girl over the house, even in group settings. Because according to my mom, guys and girls can't be just friends, she claimed it to be literally impossible. My parents would also spy on me constantly and listen on and just about all of my phone calls, to the point where if I called someone, I had to make sure all the phones in the house were in my room. I was never allowed to have a phone, but they always had to know what I was doing. So they had all my friends' phone numbers and would call them constantly when I was with them. They wouldn't let me hang out with people unless I told them exactly what our plans were. So telling them that I was going to a friend's house to hang out just to hang out, which was the truth 100 of the time, I had to come up with some random itinerary. That all being said, though, they still let me do things. For being very strict parents, they were also not very strict in some ways. Most of the times I had to bend over backwards to be able to do stuff, but every once in a while they just didn't seem to care. Amazingly enough, I have a very good relationship with them, which is mostly due to the fact I live across the country from them. Story 78. A friend of mine freshman year of college was pre-med. Toward the end of the year, he got a job for sophomore year as an RA, which gave free room and board, pay, and a limited but complimentary meal plan. The last day of finals, his parents found out he made a B in organic chem, the only B he got all year. His mom promptly called the housing and residence office and told them that his grades were suffering too much to become an RA and that she were turning down the job for him because he clearly couldn't prioritize correctly. Another friend told me that whoever answered the phone told it was none of her business, and she was causing more harm than good for her son. As far as I know, he was an RA for the rest of undergrad. Story 79. A girl I dated in high school wasn't allowed to drive a car that was of natural color, meaning no black, white, blue, green, or tan. Had to be a color that stood out against the road and surroundings. Her mom was afraid the car would blend in with the road and she'd be killed. Story 80. This is completely honest. When Chernobyl reactor tragedy happened in Russia, my mom came out screaming, "The radiation is coming, get inside." Happened to have all my friends over at the time. I was like 12. I live in South Carolina. Story 81. Telling the 5-year-old daughter that black men will kidnap and rape little red-headed girls. My mom said this to me as a black guy walked past us. The look on his face. I wanted to crawl under a rock and never leave. Embarrass and try to scare a kid to death at the same time. Thankfully, it didn't work. Story 82. GF of a high school friend of mine had crazy religious parents. They raised their daughter with traditional family values. No before marriage, no drinking, abortion is a crime, contraception is the same thing as abortion. Only trouble is, she grew up anti-contraception. She ended up having with her boyfriend convinced that faith would stop her getting pregnant. She got pregnant. Story 83. Jesus jerking coworkers found a 2x2 folded scrap of printed softcore in their 13-year-old son's Velcro wallet, removed every door in the house from its hinges, and stored them all in the garage, so he wouldn't have any privacy to sin. Kid committed suicide at 20. Story 84. Parents showing up to job interviews with their son-daughter. I don't mean they dropped them off for the interview or something. They insisted on sitting in on the interview, and even called us back to follow up on their kids' interview. This is how you doom your kids' employment prospects. But then again, maybe this is what they're trying to do. Can't let those kids become too independent now, can we? Story 85. One of my friends is 22 years old. He bought new shoes and was going to come hang out with me, but his mom wouldn't let him go out because she didn't want him to ruin his new shoes. Story 86. My best friend is Korean and his parents were super strict and traditional. He had to work in finance, law, healthcare, and had to marry a Korean girl that fit prototypical mold of a Korean housewife. Naturally, he resisted and ended up meeting a girl, OK Cupid, an adorable white girl from Minnesota that worked as a flight attendant. Rewinding a little, his parents helped him put a down payment on a condo with the condition that they get to have a set of keys to show up and help him do housework and whatnot. Back to the present, he continued seeing this girl who flew to NY as often as she could. A couple of times he had her over. His parents showed up unannounced, they would call when they were blocks away, and she hid in the closet for hours on end. One night, his mom showed up completely unannounced, no phone call, and she saw the white girl in the apartment. My friend just told the truth, and his mom, a religious Christian, started bursting in tears and fell onto her knees and started to pray in semi-tongue, saying things like, "Remove the devil from my son," and blah blah. Before she left, she ordered him to break up with her. I met up with both of them, and they were visibly angry and distraught, and lots of drinks were had. A few hours later, they were just gonna head home, but while he was out with me, his sister had been calling him with warnings that his mom and now his dad were waiting for him at the apartment. Of course, he didn't get any of the messages because his phone had died. They arrive at the apartment in total shock, and almost instantly, the dad orders my friend's sister to take her away and send her to a hotel. My friend and the girl were both drunk but sobering up, and she started bursting into tears saying, "I love you," holding her arms out toward him while being dragged out by the sister. The next morning, I saw my phone had about 10 voicemails, all from the girl. She was hysterical, saying things like, "What do I do? 10 seconds of silence. I love him." And then things like, and so on. Story 87. I knew someone in high school whose mom preferred him to masturbate to her naked body instead of. She feared would warp his sense of reality or something. Story 88. Probably my folks. Funny thing is, anytime I bring any of this up, they cannot seem to remember. Wouldn't let me go to a friend's house. Wouldn't let me go to the movies. Wouldn't even let me go to the supermarket down the road. If I ever went swimming, they hovered over at poolside. I was a strong swimmer. So no excuses, they sat in on my cello lessons that, hey, forced me to take. They even seemed to have a list of their pre-approved hobbies. I wanted to buy a skateboard, but no dice. I wanted to buy a guitar, but apparently unapproved musical instruments are not allowed. When I eventually saved enough for a PS3, my mom returned all the games, Killzone 2, Bionic Commando, Haze, and Ninja Gaiden. My dad was much more chill, and to my mom's anger, he bought back my games. There was tons of stuff like this over the years. Worst of which is probably how they have unrealistically high expectations of me. I am a private in the reserves. Well, why am I not a lieutenant in the Marines? I am doing a course in engineering. Why don't I have a degree yet? I work in a supermarket. Why aren't you a manager yet? To put this in perspective, I have just finished school, just started working, and been in the reserves for a few months. They hold me to my brother high achievements. All down to luck, of course. He landed a high salary job that had nothing to do with his degree. Anyway, rant over. I ain't looking for sympathy or anything, just thought I'd chip in them 2 cents. Story 89. I fix a lot of computers laptops, many for students. There's some really psycho spy software out there, which parents use to control basically everything on their child's computer. Stuff like microphone, webcam, keylogs, browsing history, GPS location. When I found a software like this on my cousin's laptop, it was time for the old switcheroo. I removed the software and gave him a USB stick with instructions on how to set it up on his parents' PC, which he did. So now he can watch over his parents to make sure they don't get on any inappropriate websites or start talking to strangers. He's really caring about how he raises his parents. Also, I will be his coolest cousin for a lifetime. Story 90. Didn't know the girl personally, more of a friend situation. Anyway, my friend Jay, this girl Rachel, and myself were all doing some volunteer work together after school. It's the middle of fall, and it's getting cold and dark, so my friend Jay offers to give her a ride home since he was dropping me off too. She agrees but says that her mom would be livid if she knew that a boy gave her a ride in his car. What we ended up doing was driving to her street but parking a block down so her mom couldn't see us. Yes, her mom was watching for the car from the front window. Then I switched spots with my friend Jay for the driver's seat while Rachel sat in shotgun and Jay got into the back seat. At this point in time, I was technically not supposed to be driving since I didn't have a permit. But it was only a block, so I drove slowly and parked the car in front of the house. The mom had already opened the door and was waiting for Rachel and I to come in the house. Rachel had also warned me her mom wanted to ask me a few questions. I braced myself and tried to be as charming as possible. I got the shakedown from this woman. She asked me who I was, what my relationship to her daughter was, did I attend church, who was Jay, and what was he doing with his life, and a lot more questions I can't remember. I do remember the mom was pissed at us. Not only did Rachel get a ride home with a complete stranger. Not really, we were acquaintances for a bit before this, but there was a boy in the back of the car. I thought for sure she was going to ask to see my license and registration. Rachel did the best she could to stand up for me and Jay, repeatedly telling her mom not to worry. We were only in the car together for 15 minutes and a bunch of other stuff. Things were getting pretty tense. Her mom's face was turning redder than a fire truck as I answered her questions. Finally, Rachel thanked me for getting her home while her mom huffed at me, and I left. I could sense that an argument was about to break out, and I did not want to be there for the fallout. I got back into my friend Jay's car, and Jay told me to drive down the rest of the block, make a right, and we'd pull over as soon as we were out of sight of Rachel's house and the eyes of her ever-watchful mom. We did. And then Jay and I talked about Rachel's crazy mom the rest of the way home. Poor girl. The funniest part about this whole adventure of ours was Jay and his car. Jay is gay. Lol, I know. But he offered to do something nice for her because he's a nice person. Furthermore, from the outside, his car was a normal little white sedan. On the inside, there was a giant poster of Lady Gaga tacked to the ceiling. I think he also had his spandex glitter Xmas light costume from going to a Lady Gaga concert at some point. It still baffles me to think about how little trust this woman had for her daughter. She was so mad that her child would dare to get a ride home from her fellow volunteers. When we saw her again next week for volunteering hours, she told us she was grounded for the next couple of months, couldn't go out to see her few approved friends, and she was never allowed to get a ride home from me again. But she was actually really calm about the whole thing, telling us that she's not mad at us or anything. I still find the whole situation to be just nuts. Story 91. Copy-paste I teach 3rd grade. One of my kids who made As on nearly everything had gotten an 87 on a creative writing assignment. The morning of the day after I passed the papers back to them, she came up to me looking a little embarrassed and said her mom was going to come in around noon to talk to me about the grade. Past teachers had warned me that this girl had a helicopter mom, but I hadn't had any bad experiences with her yet, and we were a couple months into the school year. Sure enough, right as the lunch bell was about to ring, the door bursts open and in storms helicopter mom. She looked furious. I could tell she was about to lay into me in front of my entire class, but then a piercing metallic shriek hit my ears. One of her rotors had clipped the wall, and she just started falling apart and spinning out of control. A rotor flew across the room and killed 2 and injured 3, and then she crashed into our terrarium and burst into flames, killing the class's pet frog Scooter, and shrapnel from the wreckage peppered the front row of kids. R.I.P. Scooter. Story 92. I know a kid whose parents are super cool and his whole family is fun to be around. But when he's not with them, they track his phone and call if he isn't as far along to his destination as they think he should be. He also was homeschooled in middle school and through high school was forced to do readings and homework early. But then he once was told that his homework was taking too long, so he must be doing something wrong and to do it again. They go to church every Sunday, and now that he's in college, he still has to go to church by himself. They have a family friend who attends the church and is supposed to report if he's there or not. Not the most extreme, but coming from my lax family and freedom, his situation always shocks me. Story 93. My boyfriend's mother wouldn't let him handle his own medication at 25 years old. Stole his car keys and parked it somewhere because, despite what his doctors say, she believes his medication isn't safe for him to drive with. Comes over uninvited every day to clean our apartment and throws away whatever she thinks is unimportant. Steals all our laundry and takes it home to her place to wash, despite the fact that we have our own washer and dryer. Excuse us for not wasting water to wash our clothes we've worn each evening, so they sit on the bathroom floor for a few days. Big deal. She steals the clean laundry on the couch. Wardrobe too, because for her, if it's not hung up or in a drawer, it must be clean. Although I don't know anyone that puts dirty laundry on their living room couch. But seriously, she jacked my boyfriend's car. We can report it to the police because her name is on the title. I never saw any PG-13 films till I moved out and went to university. My mom was going through a fundamentalist Christian phase. Story 94. Hope. Am not too late to the party, but here we go, my parents being the case. Wasn't allowed to have Pokemon cards. My best friend at the time, 4th, 5th grade, gave me some of his cards, and I hid them under my pillow. Of course, my mom found them and told me I was sleeping with the devil. Flash forward a couple of painfully awkward years of my life. My curfew in high school was 9 p.m., junior prom. My parents picked me up at my friend's house immediately after we got back in front of all my friends, and my senior prom date who was terribly out of my league. Never got the talk even after I walked in on them in 6th grade. At this point, I still thought babies were made from kissing. I could go on forever with this LOL. Story 95. Not the worst case, but my friend wasn't allowed to do the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time. Let your atheist friend do it. He's immune. LOL, so every time he wanted to beat OOT again, I'd beat the Shadow Temple. Oh, but the Muslim-sounding prayers of the Fire Temple were fine. Story 96. Well, my ex-girlfriend best friend's parents suddenly decided they didn't like me, so they accused me of molesting her and tried to make a big fuss with the police. School all the other parents, we were both in marching band, so all the parents knew each other, then proceeded to pull her out of school, a pretty prestigious private school too, to homeschool her because they were convinced I was ruining their daughter's purity. Story 97. I knew a girl in from 7th to 12th grade whose mother would lurk outside the school and verbally attack any student that bullied her daughter. During our college entrance exams, she spent the whole 3 hours of each of the 7 exams stationed outside the school, waiting for me to come out. When I did, she asked me extreme details about the questions and answers on the exam. It was obvious she had studied almost better than I had, and I got a 17.520 average, mind you. After she was done asking elaborate questions, which took nearly 40 minutes, she would immediately ask if her daughter seemed okay, and if I thought she had it under control, or if she seemed stressed. I met this girl and her mother a year later. Her mom apparently drives her to college, which is 1 hour away by car and 2 hours by transit. She then asked me to teach her daughter how to commute to college, which weirded me the out. That's not my job? I did it, but apparently taking a bus was too hard for her, so her mom continued to drive her to college. Meanwhile, one of my friends was friends with this girl in childhood, up to the point when I met her, and she told me that she didn't know how to tie her shoes until she was about 11, because her mom would tie them for her. Personally, I had a very crazy accident when I was a kid by falling in a gap and twisting my leg so bad that I was almost permanently crippled. After that, my mom wouldn't even let me hop from a 30-centimeter high ledge to the ground. She also demanded that I call her every time I made it safely to college or wherever I was going to hang out with my friends. It took a year of fights and yelling for her to accept that I was going to outright ignore her demand. Story 98. I grew up with an overprotective mom. She taught Sunday school and some of her students went to my school. My first kiss was at a high school football game, and a girl in my mom's class saw it and called her. She pulled up to the game and got a police officer to bring me and the girl to the stadium entrance. She made me break up with the girl on the spot and then write an essay about how kissing praised Satan. Story 99. On the first date I went on with my now wife, we were going to a Sadie Hawkins dance. She had gotten over a case of mono over a month ago, and her mom left me, someone she had never met, a full-page letter detailing exactly how she should act since she was still recovering and asking me to make sure she behaved according to her instructions. No dancing, no walking too far, no exertion whatsoever, etc. and the mom told me not to show her the letter. Of course, I read it out loud, and we laughed. Story 100. I took care of a teenage girl with cancer. I used to be a pediatric cancer nurse. The disease and the treatments are typically very painful. The mother flat out refused to allow her to have any narcotics pain medication. She did not want her to become a drug addict. No amount of teaching, education, or watching her daughter suffer would change her mind. Story 101. When I was in grade school, one of my really good friends had an extremely overprotective mother. She would do this during the school year, but it got worse during the summer when he had more free time. She would make these impossible to finish chore lists whenever he wanted to leave the house. It never really dawned on us that her intent was to never allow him to leave, and it hadn't dawned on me that he really never had, except for school. The day I figured it out was the day we both decided, hey, if I help you, we'll get the whole list done, and we can go play. I went over to his house and we busted our asses working on her stupid list. We finished it by early afternoon and he presented it to her. She looked a little surprised and then really coldly said, "Where's the other page?" We both just looked at her in silence. She just walked out saying he didn't see the second page. We literally watched her write a second page of random bullshit from her room. I realized she never intended to let him leave the house. Ever. She eventually stopped letting his friends come over. His dad worked at the post office and I would sometimes ask him how my friend was doing. HD never really had an answer. He always looked like she had his in a sling. She was an overbearing. Story 102. My mom was always really paranoid about me. I never learned how to ride a bike or drive a car because she didn't allow me to. I think she was afraid of allowing me any mobility. She also drove me to school every day up through the end of high school, even though it was less than a mile away, and I would have gladly rather walked, or God forbid, learned to drive myself. I never made any friends as a small child because I wasn't allowed to leave the house without her and she never wanted to go outside. When all my friends talk about how much fun summer vacation was when they were kids, running around the neighborhood having shenanigans, my memories are of sitting alone quietly in my empty house while my mom worked. Every year I dreaded summer. When I was a young child, we moved into her parents' spare bedroom and had a bunk bed since there was only one room. Then when I was around 11, we moved out into a 3-bedroom trailer, just the two of us. And she made us continue to share a bedroom. We slept in those bunk beds until I was 18 and got to move away to college. Also, none of the doors, except the bathroom door, could ever be closed. Needless to say, I never ever allowed any of my friends to come visit me, which really stunted my social growth and has left me kind of weird about socializing even as an adult. And speaking of friends, I had to lie about having any male friends because she was convinced I was having orgies with them from the age of 12 onwards, so I always made up convoluted lies about who I was hanging out with and what I was doing. She was also convinced I was drinking and on drugs from about the same age because I was acting so different than you used to. Yeah. It's called adolescence. And realizing your mom is a control freak? The lesson, if there is one, is don't try to insulate your kids from the world or stymie their growth. They will only devise more nefarious ways to lie to you and never trust you again. Story 103. I love my mother with my whole heart, but she was a little bit overprotective. I couldn't watch kissing scenes on TV until I was 18. I wasn't allowed to date or go out with my friends too dangerous. I couldn't watch barely anything except VeggieTales. She went through every text and call I made, opened up all my mail, knew every penny spent on my account. I basically only went to school and church and school, haha. Went to a private Christian school, then was homeschooled. She only let me go to high school because my dad worked there, and I made a huge presentation convincing her to let me go to a regular high school so I could spread the word of God, which she agreed, then would threaten to pull me from school if I wasn't fulfilling my end of the bargain. Needless to say, I had some severe depression, suicidal problems, acting outgoing, crazy problems growing up. Love her to death, but am taking a much different approach on my kids, LOL. And am an atheist, 16 years of church for nothing. Ha. Story 104. Where I am from, military training is compulsory for all men. This one recruit complained to his parents about his sergeant. Parents came to the army camp to confront the sergeant. Story 105. I knew this girl in high school who was the textbook perfect child and daughter. Top marks, involved in all the music programs at school, taught piano lessons to children, and worked part-time in a senior's home. She never partied or drank or got into any trouble. She saved up money from her jobs and bought herself a brand new car when she was 17. Paid for her own insurance and gas. Her mother prohibited her from the following: band trips, choir trips, school trips in general, sleepovers, driving her car that she paid for with her own money, anywhere but to school and work and home. Giving friends rides home from school, her mother kept track of the mileage to ensure her rules were being followed. The punishment for any infractions which never occurred, because it was not in this girl's nature to be disobedient, was that her mom would take away her car. I will never understand why she was always treated as if she was grounded. Story 106. I knew this kid whose mom let him get a skateboard, but she would only let him ride it, sitting down. Other skaters. Dude, that's cool. We've all done that once, but really you're supposed to, ride it standing up. Why don't you try that? Mom won't let me. Well, your mom isn't here. It didn't matter. We'd try to make him ride standing up, but he'd never do it. You'd see him always hanging with the rest of the pack of skaters in our town, the one kid who only skated sitting down. Butt skating, lol. Story 107. My husband's childhood was pretty sheltered. He's never had a sleepover, for instance. That blows my mind. He was never allowed to play in the street with other kids unless he was within view from his house either. My childhood was pretty much the opposite. I was always going off with groups of friends, roaming the neighborhood, playing in the park. Plus, I had sleepovers almost every weekend. Story 108. My mom grew up afraid of water and never learned how to swim. During the summer holidays, my brother and I used to do these adventure days where you do cool stuff like archery, obstacle courses, and kayaking. Now, at the age of 13 and 12, my brother and I were pretty competent swimmers. But because my mom was so scared of water, she refused to sign our permission slip to go kayaking. So, myself and my brother ended up sitting in a boat with the 6 to 9-year-olds life jacketed up to the max, whilst our friends completely took the hilarious looking back. Pretty humiliating at the time, though. Story 109. A few years back, I was in a campground washroom brushing my teeth, and this drill instructor-like father wearing camo cargo pants and tank top, while sporting a mohawk and dog tags, sent his son and daughter into the women's and men's washrooms for showers, then proceeded to run back and forth between the men's and women's sides, right outside the shower doors, barking out orders like, "Take that back to the site and get the right soap. Take your shirt off. Drop them pants. If you can open your eyes in the ocean, you can open them now. Scrub that hair." Story 110. When Sally or Jimmy's irate parent calls me over, why I fired their precious, perfect, whatever child. I love fielding phone calls like that. Not. No parent wants to hear that their kid ain't great. I get that, but we're pretty understanding with minors. They make mistakes, but things like making out in the cooler, mishandling food, and stealing money aren't okay. I might press charges on occasion. Source: HR for QSR franchise. My friend in middle school was raised by pretty religious JW parents. My dad was friends with them, and we would frequently have dinner on their patio. I remember while her mom was grilling, my dad and I were discussing fossils and dinosaurs, and our delight with the fact that such behemoths ever existed. My friend got really excited and asked a question, and her mother whipped around so fast and shushed her more harshly than I'd ever heard her speak to her kids. She told her not to ask questions. My friend shut up and kept her head down. I'd never had the experience of someone saying don't ask questions. It was mind-boggling. Story 111. This one time at church, a kid kept shooting me with rubber bands, so I picked one up and shot it at him. It barely hit his arm, but a few minutes later, she pulled me by the ears and basically dragged me outside and yelled at me from the top of her lungs. Story 112. My sister has done a real job on her daughter, now 16. My sister was born to my too young mom and left to fend for herself a lot. So she overcompensated with her daughter by always pointing out everything in a given situation that could go wrong. Careful, don't spill the soda, the bottle is really full. If you don't time it right, the revolving door will go around again. Just go through again. I can't even think of all the minute examples. She means these as ways of making sure her daughter is not caught off guard. But now she is just timid and fearful of everything. I can see her assessing every environment for possible dangers and failings. I am really hoping as she ages and goes off on her own, things will even out. Story 113. I had a little boyfriend back in school. We dated throughout 7th and 8th grade, which is forever in kids' time. But we only saw each other in school. His parents wouldn't let him go anywhere after school. I couldn't even call him on the phone. His parents screened all their calls and wouldn't pick up when I called. He wasn't allowed to answer the phone. He was so smart and funny. Straight A student. I thought he was going to be really successful in life. Last I heard, a few years ago, he was in the army and suffering from severe depression. Story 114. My sister is the worst mother, along with my brother-in-law. My niece and nephew weren't allowed to have friends and were incredibly limited from seeing their grandparents and aunts-uncles. My sister wouldn't let them open their Xmas presents, they would sit unopened, and in most cases, she returned them. Once she was mad at me for going on a trip and asking her to help drive me to the bus station. She wrote on my Facebook that she hoped I died on the bus and didn't let me speak to the kids for a year and a half. I grew up watching them both. They saw me as a savior, and I made sure I always acted like one. I still try to be the cool aunt, until recently my niece, who just turned 18, told us she was pregnant. Not newly pregnant, like 38 weeks. She hid it so long because she's that afraid of her parents. She wasn't allowed to work, get her license, nothing. She's having a kid with absolutely no life skills or money. I hate my sister. I know it's awful, but she is going to get to ruin another kid's life. Overall, don't shelter your kids because they will make you regret it. Story 115. Helped forced her daughter to frame her roommate with theft and then moved in with her daughter once the roommate was removed. Proceeded to do her daughter's coursework, clean her dorm room, do her laundry, and cook her meals on a hot plate in the dorm room. This lasted a good month and a half, and it took the university going on lockdown due to a murder near campus for them to get caught. Story 116. My ex-boyfriend's mom couldn't handle the idea of her perfect son spending time with me over her. She was super strict, wouldn't let us be alone together, and he was never allowed to come to my house. On our second year together, we went on our first holiday camping up north. In one day, she phoned him 67 times. I kid you not, 67 times. He answered every time unless he was driving, in which case I had to answer the phone. If I refused, he would go in a mood with me. I didn't say anything for the sake of trying not to let it ruin the trip. After day 2, they were both making arrangements for her to join us on our camping trip. I packed my stuff and got a train back home. We broke up shortly after. Story 117. My best friend's ex-boyfriend's mother was still showering them. He is 24 and his brother is 27-ish. Their little sister was still on the. She is in high school. Story 118. This entire thread sounds like raised by narcissists is leaking. And half the people here should recommend the subjects of their anecdotes to that sub. As to my own story, I don't want to go into it because I'm still living it. Yay me. Story 119. I have another super religious friend who was never allowed to watch Disney movies as a child. She could only watch movies that were wholesome and didn't have make-believe. She couldn't even read fairy tale stories, only biblical ones. She is 32, smells of cat 247, and divorced from an equally disgusting guy. Story 120. I know of one woman who has always been extremely overprotective of her kids, and to be honest, my family is fairly convinced there's some severe mental issues going on there. The kids are almost never allowed to do anything. She constantly backs out of letting them attend birthday parties, and until they hit about 15, she would come with them when they did and stay the whole time. They were almost never allowed out of their yard. She was constantly terrified of someone hurting them. And then she found out that the father had been abusing the girls. If you thought that was up to 11, at last check, there was only one friend even allowed in the house anymore, and she's escalated to surveillance cameras covering the whole outside of the house, elaborate alarm systems inside, and basically never sleeping in order to make sure that nobody is going to break in and kidnap the kids. She did have the monster arrested ASAP. He's in jail now, and the girls were instantly put into counseling. So despite all her craziness, she did help them when it counted too. And for any worried that she made it up. I don't want to give too many details online, but she definitely did not. Story 121. My parents were fairly strict, but they also trusted me. I just got grounded for really weird stuff, like one time putting too much butter on my bread. I was grounded for 2 weeks. Story 122. When I worked in the housing office for a local university, I had a mom come in with her adult child to talk about the suite building her daughter was assigned to. I don't remember the content of the conversation, but I made a point of trying to talk to the student directly as much as possible. Mom was furious that I was ignoring her questions and told me to ignore her daughter, who was standing there staring at the floor. As it turns out, the daughter was in a master's program and older than I was at the time, but Mom was still in charge. I now work in a different office on campus, and the number of parents who come in or call to complain about their adult child's class's grades employability is insane. I refuse to talk to parents about their adult child's education and tell them to have their son-daughter come to the office in person with their student card to ask these questions. If they argue, I mention privacy regulations and apologize that I can't be of more help, but their child is an adult and I have to talk to them directly. Some parents try to argue this, but there's nothing they can do unless they come with son-daughter to the office in person. If that happens, I go out of my way to make a point of talking to the student, even if the parent tries to control the conversation. Parents tend to get the point by then. My job is to help these students become socialized, functional adults, and I have no interest in allowing overbearing helicopter parents derail that progress. Story 123. My dad always took my phone electronics away and hid them after 8 p.m. If I tried to go watch TV or use a light after 10, he'd turn the power off from the main switch. Story 124. Had one of our son's friends' parents want copies of report cards from the kids' friends to prove that they were at the appropriate academic standard, classes and grades, to be friends with the kid. Story 125. I place a lot of almost too much importance on self-sufficiency and the idea of being generally competent. Every time I meet someone who can't complete a simple task, and their excuse is that their parents didn't let them or always did it for them, I get irrationally angry. You're 30 and can't do laundry? Can't put gas in your own car? Can't make a sandwich? Like literally just stacking things between bread? Your selfish parents ruined you and you'll forever be a man-child in my eyes. Story 126. Not on the level of most of the insanity on here, but a friend of mine had a weird father that would freak out at the drop of a hat. You took an aspirin? You have to call a doctor to find out if you should. Good for thing. He lived in Canada. They're free. You popped a zit? That's a medical procedure that should be supervised by someone. You fed a squirrel a piece of bread? You probably have rabies now. Edit, I must have blocked this out. I just remembered that their mother wiped the younger brothers until he was at least 14. Story 127. My parents were pretty crazy. They never let me have my own friends and would call me incessantly anytime I hung out with any of the people I was allowed to hang out with. They didn't leave me alone overnight at home until I was 19 years old, and then they tried to get someone to come babysit me. They broke the lock off my bedroom door after I wouldn't let my dad in, and he cracked the trying to break it down because I wanted time alone. Anytime I would go out, I was berated and told I was going to be murdered, raped, abducted, etc. They still do this. Story 128. I have a friend who does not get on well with her parents. They actively insult her and distance themselves from her at family get-togethers because of her hair color cotton candy pink, which actually looks amazingly tasteful with her complexion. They want to force her to dye it brown again. Problem is, she has massive self-esteem issues, for lack of a better term. It goes well beyond that, and literally cannot handle how she looks with her natural hair color. They wrote into a very prestigious college she was accepted to, stating that she would not be attending. It wasn't the college they wanted, so now she is without a job, without a car, and is not attending school. The only thing she is allowed to do, to my knowledge, is study for some tests and eat sleep. This girl is going to go exactly where you all expect her to. Rebelling against her parents with the counterculture, away from everything her overbearing family mandates for her. She wants out. I worry for her. She is one of those kinds of people who is bright enough to see through the bullshit they have been handed and could feasibly make it on their own, but can't break free of their current situation. Story 129. I have a friend whose parents homeschooled her. She lived in the middle of nowhere. They had church in their living room. She wasn't allowed to drive, to date, to talk to boys outside of educational or religious activities, etc. She would make hand-knit clothing and sell it at art fairs and reenactments, and her parents would sit in their van all day and watch her. She had never been anywhere without a chaperone until the day she eloped with her husband, at 24. She's a surprisingly normal person, actually. Story 130, My Time to Shine. Kinda different from being an overprotective parent and instead just a psycho parent, but stay with me. Okay. So a few years ago, I nannied for a upper-middle-class family. The father was an incredibly highly paid psychologist for the military, and the mother worked in high-end banking stuff. No idea, really. They had adopted a 4-year-old boy from the Philippines, whom had become self-sufficient, as best a 4-year-old can when he lives in a poverty-stricken orphanage for the first few years of his life. He could use the bathroom, get his own food, entertain himself for hours. However, upon arriving in Australia, the UP parents decided the best way to earn his trust was to unteach him these life skills. It was as if the dad was conducting his own psychological experiment with the child. 'Cause, it's not a matter of proving your love and support to the child that gains a child's trust. By the time I was nannying this poor kid, he was completely reliant on other people's help. They made him wear nappies to school, he needed help wiping after using the toilet, and instead of paying attention to him, they bought him expensive toys every day, and I mean every day. To the point that his room resembled a weird, rich kid's hoarder space. They never made him eat vegetables, punished him for acting out, which he did regularly, and he mostly sat around and watched TV. Now, clearly, this bizarre case of parenting was a matter of look how kind and rich we are. We are so philanthropic, we actually adopted a kid. It got to the point where I tossed up whether or not to call D, OCS, Aussie CPS because of the extreme psychological abuse this kid was subject to. However, I knew I had no cases on paper. This family looked perfect. But once you were a nanny and got into the nitty-gritty of it all, it was clear that they were absolutely insane. When I quit because I was offered a high-paying role in my usual field of work, which I gave them months of notice about, the mother blew up at me, called me petty, spoilt, and selfish, and said she would never give me a good reference. I just apologized for any inconvenience I had caused and offered to find a replacement nanny, as I am friends with many nannies. She continued abusing me by text, until a week later when it came to the day I usually nannied, she sent me a text saying she forgave me and would allow me to do one more shift so I could see the little boy again. Clearly, I did not want to have anything to do with these insane monsters, and I honestly think she was more upset about having to spend more time with the kid while they searched for a replacement nanny. Point of the story is, they were a pack of cunts, and I find myself worrying about the boy's future. He is going to have some serious issues with trust and authority whilst being incredibly rich and spoiled. It was very hard working with him as he was a monster child, but I had to remind myself daily that it was not his fault his parents were insane dickheads. Story 131. My girlfriend's parents don't allow her to hang out with her friends, even during summer break, because they'd be distracting her from her studies. If she's good, she's allowed one free pass per month to hang out with some friends for a couple hours. She refers to going home for summer break from college as imprisonment. Story 132. My little brother's girlfriend's parents. Ugh. They wanted to meet my family by going out to a restaurant with us, but wouldn't allow their daughter to come. So we awkwardly sat with my brother, my dad, and my brothers. Girlfriend's parents, and they just talked about her and my brother the whole night. It was bad. Story 133. So I have overprotective parents. They wouldn't allow me to leave my house front garden when I was a kid. Had no friends, never had a talk. Was required to come home latest 11:30 p.m. when was 21 years. They would decide where and what ill study, where ill live, and where ill go during my free time. Would go on crazy rampages through my room to find bad stuff. Used to tell me that all families are like that. But there is an upside. I had enough at 21. I knew it's wrong how they are behaving, and took my and left to another country 2,000 miles away. Didn't speak to them for 6 months and they got the idea. I now have 2 degrees in the field I love. I have a career and am engaged to the guy I ran away with. Now if they try to control me, I just cut them off again. I think I turned out fine. Story 134. My college boyfriend's parents. On our first date, they called him several times throughout the evening, which he ignored out of courtesy to me. When he finally picked up towards the end of the night, they were in the midst of getting into the car to make the 1-hour drive to our university. They assumed because he didn't pick up his phone for a few hours that surely he must be dead, kidnapped, etc. For the record, there was no emergency. They simply wanted to know what he was up to. This behavior continued throughout our 1.5 years together. And naturally, any attempt by him to correct this behavior would result in his mom sobbing about how she did it because she loved him and was concerned for his safety. Story 135. My current girlfriend's mom is insane. We went out to dinner and her mom called the restaurant and had the waiter ask every table looking for her to make sure we were there. Story 136. Was at an office waiting for my scheduled interview time. And in the waiting room with me was another kid who looked like a college freshman with his mom. They were going over common interview questions and getting him ready for his turn. Anyways, I'm not paying them too much mind till I overhear her say that between me and the other people waiting in the room and her son, he's got this in the bag. Well, the rest of us didn't appreciate that too much, but kept it to ourselves. His turn for the interview comes up and the mom tries to go in with her son, explaining it's okay, I'm just going to watch. Anyways, that's an obvious no-go, so after a few minutes of explaining to her that it was between relevant parties, and she either waited in the room with the rest of us or could take her son and leave, she angrily agreed to wait outside. After his interview, he walked out and my name was called, and as I was walking towards the door, she rushed by me, said she was only going to be a few moments, and proceeded to ask the interviewer about her son's evaluation. It was really awkward, and I felt bad for the guy. He just kind of sat in the room with his head down. Story 137. I am 16 years old, and I have a very overprotective father. There are a lot of things that he wouldn't let me do for crazy reasons. One, if I meet up with a friend at a shopping mall or whatever, he has me walking with my friends and I. No excuses. He will follow us to every shop we go. If we went to the bathroom, he will wait outside the ladies. Then if he was walking with us and saw a shop that he'd want to go in and take a look at, my friends and I would have to follow him to that shop until he was done. I was forbidden to walk very fast. It would make my dad think that I'm trying to run away. Two, as a girl, I am not allowed to have long hair, bribing below the shoulders. For the whole 16 years of my life, my dad controlled how my hair looks like. The typical cut that I'd get from the hairdressers is either a pixie cut or a short bob. When I asked him why wasn't I allowed to have my own hair on my head that I could style, he'd say, "You're only 16. You're a schoolgirl too. Long hair makes you look old. Short hair presents your natural beauty and your youth. I know what I'm doing. Don't argue with me." Now this makes me really mad because as a teenager, I'm obviously starting to care about my looks and I look really hideous with short hair. But he thinks otherwise. The longest hair I've had is until my shoulders. Also, I must always have a fringe. I cannot have a side parting which makes me look pretty good. I must have a fringe. 3, I cannot wear any sorts of makeup, dangling earrings, or tie my hair up if I get hot. No colored lip balm for me. Or pretty earrings for me to wear because it's age inappropriate, no mascara or anything for a 16-year-old because it's age inappropriate. I'm even lucky he lets me wear nail polish. Also, I can't wear sandals because it's age inappropriate and ugly. 4. My phone must always be checked and see whether here's any suspicious activity going on. This means that all my chats with friends and family must be read. Also, he has the passwords for my social media account and occasionally goes into my account and posts things for me to make me seem active to all my followers and whatever. If I attempt to change the password of my account, I'll get a scolding and I'm forced to tell it to him. 5. My parents are divorced. I go to stay with my mom on the weekends when she's free and isn't working. I am only allowed to go and stay with my mother under the condition that I give him a status update, a message saying where I am and what I'm doing every 30 minutes. If I'm late on time, I'll get an angry call message of my dad being angry at me for not sending the status update. He also must approve of the places that I'm going to with my mom during the weekends. Can't think of anything else, but that's pretty kick the big issues. My dad is very, very overprotective, and it's firing me nuts. No time for me to grow up and discover things. Just trapped by his rules, seriously can't wait till I'm 18 so I can escape from this madness. Story 138. His parents let him hang out with me at the local park that is a 2-minute walk from his house. His mom supervises it all, and he's only allowed to stay for about half an hour. He's a sophomore in high school. Cuddles, got any good car stories? Story 139. I knew a mother that set up cameras in her daughter's room, locked the door from the outside and nailed the window shut because the daughter was adopted, and the mother worried she was a danger to the real children. The girl wasn't very religious, and the parents told her that both her learning disabilities and her getting were raped were God's punishment. When she turned 18, the parents threw her out of the house and she committed suicide. Moral of the story, I guess, don't be a crazy psychotic parent. Story 140. When I was a child, my mother and her friend used to take turns driving each other's kids to school. My mother's friend was so scared that the children were going to get hurt that she would never make left turns. The school was 2 miles away in the suburbs of Jersey. It took my mother 10 minutes to get us there, and her friend took 45 minutes. In order to make a left turn, she needed to drive past where she was going and make 3 right turns. Story 141. I wish I found this thread earlier. My mom hid my passport so I couldn't leave the country when I was accepted for a study abroad in college. I'm 23 and moved out of my mom's house a year ago. After doing so, she hired a private investigator to follow me around. I've been on my mom's phone plan up until last month when I discovered she's been reading my text messages. This was all to protect me. In actuality, it's because she's a narcissist and obsessed with controlling every aspect of my life. There's more crazy protective things she's done, but those are my favorite top 3 at the moment. Story 142. My parents never let me get into vans that had free candy. All those kids that got to enjoy that free candy, and I had to sit off to the side and miss out. Story 143. If my cousins want to eat hard candy, including cough drops, they have to chew them in front of my aunts with their mouths open so they won't choke. That's just one story of many stupid phobias they have that have rubbed off on the kids. My 10-year-old cousin screeched at me once because I left a few strands of string from a friendship bracelet on my grandma's bed because grandma might inhale them and choke in her sleep. Poor kid. She's going to be just as psychotic. Story 144. My parents are pretty overprotective about things, and while I hate it, I understand why, and I'm okay with it. It's because I have a physical disability. They aren't overprotective about everything, though. Instead of talking about me, I'll tell a story my buddy told me. He knew this kid's parents, and even compared to mine, were insanely overprotective. Their son was 17 before he had an energy drink, which he had to sneak with help from my friend. He was strictly forbidden from them and coffee. He was only allowed water, milk, and juices. Soda very, very rarely. He wasn't allowed to have video game consoles connected to the internet because his parents basically said, they'll get our IP and hack us and kill us ZOMG. Now, I don't have much of a real-world social life. More than some folks, sure, but not much of one. Online gaming with friends has been a lifesaver. It gives me a social life, which is something I otherwise wouldn't have much of. This kid has less of a real-life social life than I do, and he can't even have an online social life. He isn't even allowed to have social media from what I've been told. They check his YouTube video history all the time, and if he deletes it before they see it, he's grounded. He's basically in solitary confinement with no access to people, online or IRL. Also with the limited diet I mentioned. Story 145. One of my kids was friends for a long while with an older boy that he'd met at a summer science camp. My kid was 9, the other kid was 12, but you would never know it by talking to him. Why? Because everywhere he went and everything he did, his mother did with him. The science camp? She sat in the class with them every day. When they came over to our house, the mom had to be where she could literally see her child. Playing in my son's room, stand in the hall outside, playing in the backyard, had to sit in the sunroom that overlooked our completely fenced-in backyard in a nice, quiet suburban neighborhood. No, he wasn't handicapped physically or mentally. He wasn't slow or behind for his age. He just had his mother hanging off of him. 24 got to where my kid had had enough of the mom sitting behind them in the movies or following them on every ride in the water park and had no desire to hang out with this kid anymore. By this time, the kid is 15 but shows no signs of growing up. Oh, and is super pasty because it's sunblock 30 anytime he steps outside. While I totally expected to hear that he'd murdered both his parents in their sleep, we recently heard he's taking classes at the local community college. Of course, his mom is sitting in the back of every class he takes. My parents were rather strict all through high school. They found out I went to one party with alcohol in high school the summer before my senior year. They took my cell phone, my driving privileges. I couldn't hang out with anyone except the girl my mother obviously wanted me to date and eventually marry, which is another story altogether. My computer privileges, TV, video games. For the entire summer, 3 months of the best years of my life according to them. Gone, thanks to them. They claimed they were mad that I lied to them about not going to the party, but they didn't ground the out of me any of the other very few times I told lies. My theory. My mom was just terrified of what other moms would say about me going to a party with alcohol, which unless if they were psycho like my mother, they would think it's completely normal. Story 146. Father was a pastor. 1. They had a keylogger installed on my computer. 2. When I got wise and stopped using said computer, they would ask to see something on my social media, and then scroll through everything I posted. One time, when I was probably 14, my parents bought me Guitar Hero, so I posted about it on MySpace. I didn't have a system, but I wanted to seem cool, so I said they let me choose what console, but I chose PC. My father berated me for lying. 3. When I went to college, I had to call them every night. This normally meant calling them as I walked to the bar frat and then turning my phone off after. 4. One time, my phone died and I had lost my charger. My father called the local cops who woke me up and told me to call my parents. 5. I could only attend school functions or have sleepovers at my house, probably slept over at a friend's 10 times total. I had to leave all dances early and couldn't stay at any school functions past 10 excluding dances, but like I said, had to leave early. These are the most ridiculous I can think of off the top of my head, but I know there's more. Moving out at 19 and getting some therapy helped me work through this bullshit and accept my very paranoid parents LOL. Story 147. Ooh, this isn't the parents, but the brothers. X1. Parents weren't approving of me because we weren't from the same country of origin. Worried that we won't get along with the fam, etc. So asked us to let it go. She didn't want to, and I told them that I had good intention and wanted to be with her. Her brother decided to step in. Cut off her internet by locking her MAC address. Cut off her phone's connection by 10 p.m., going through her Facebook to unfriend me every chance he gets. He was a younger brother. X2. Her brother was my roommate, and he was older than her by a yearish. I was with his sister for about 4 years. Asked her parents for permission. Everyone was good to go. I told him that I'm planning to propose and got the approval from the parents. He told me no, when I was literally just telling him. So I asked him to tell me why he was not comfortable, and what could I do to make him feel better about the whole thing. He gave me a list of craps to do. I did all he asked. 4 months later, I told him that I did everything he'd asked, so I was going to propose on this then weekend. He left to go home to his sister to give his side about why she shouldn't marry me yet. So when I go to pick her up, she started bawling, and I was sitting there with her talking whether we should get married or not. Half a day later, we decided to go for it. I proposed, she said yes. He stopped talking to her, and she fell into depression. She dumped me 4 days before the wedding. He left my place and never came back when I was home. Left his there for 3 more months without paying the rent. Her mom never tried to step in. Besides, he just needs times when I needed the rent money. I probably have dodged some bullets, family, but it still left some bitterness. Story 148. This is about a girl I went to college with. This happened during our 2nd year of school. Her parents required her to go home to visit them almost every weekend. They lived 3-ish hours away. They also called her at least 10 times per day. One weekend, she convinced her parents to let her stay on campus because she needed to study for midterm exams. She decided that to avoid distractions, she would turn off her phone and go to the library. When her parents couldn't reach her, they first called her roommate, who told them that their daughter was studying at the library. Then, since the roommate wasn't with her, the parents called the girl's RA. Finally, when the RA told them to calm down and that their daughter was fine, she was just studying at the library, her parents called the campus police. Story 149. My mom's parents were college professors. One summer, when my mom was 17, they were leading a summer class abroad for 2 months. They left my mom at home because she was working. They get back and shortly start yelling at her. See, they had calculated how many miles she would have to drive to work, to the grocery store, to church, etc., and she had gone over that amount. This was not acceptable. Story 150. When my fiancé and I first started dating, my parents were very paranoid about him staying overnight, despite the guest room being in the basement and my room being up an insanely creaky flight of stairs. Apparently, they were afraid he was some kind of ninja. Anyway, they always made him leave at exactly midnight. Rain or shine, heat or cold. This really wouldn't have bothered us too much, except to get where he lived at the time, he had to travel through a very sketchy part of town. One night, he was walking home in the dark and the rain and almost got mugged. The next day, he told my parents and I what happened. My mother's response? Honey, when that happens, you just have to pray to the angels to protect you. You don't need to sleep anywhere near my daughter. A couple weeks later, she tried to break us up because the intimacy problem between us could lead to sin. And that's when I moved out. Story Story 151. Here's just a few experiences with my mom. She's is ultra-religious and overbearing. She gets off on snooping on everyone. When I was probably 14, she confronted me and scolded me because she discovered that I had wrote in very small print in one of my notebooks, "Sperm bank, if you build it, they will come." She also sat down with my sister and I and did a Bible study on why masturbation is bad when she suspected we were masturbating. When I was 19, before the age of cell phones, I was studying with a group for a test till about 2 a.m. She knew there was a girl in the group. When I got home, she was waiting for me to tell me off. I just ignored her and went to bed. I then found out the next day that she had called every number that she could find on the caller ID for that girl. She called her parents, sister, and baby daddy around 1 a.m. I was so embarrassed. When I turned 18, my friend and I were excited to go to a strip club for the first time. The next day, I got scolded for going to a strip club. I have no idea how she could have known. I used all cash and didn't use the ATM there. I can only assume that she was following me. This wouldn't surprise me in the least. As soon as I could afford to, I moved 1,300 miles away. I can also safely say that I was completely when it came to dating. My dad wasn't exactly the greatest either. I've battled depression pretty much my whole life. My mom is a control freak and still tries to control my siblings and I. All she has accomplished is to push us away. Story 152. I worked at an elementary school a few years back. There was a third grade knot whose mom never left his side. She sent an email to every staff member saying none of us could speak to her child under any circumstances. Then she tried to sue based on her son not being called on in class. The principal at the time refused to address this woman. She would take photos of students without her son in them, which other parents asked her to not do since her husband was the offender. She just kept doing this. She blew up on the last day of school when a child asked her to stop taking photos of them. The next year, the school got a new principal and superintendent. She was not allowed on the premises if there were other students there. She pulled her son a month later and moved. Now, all visited to the school have to scan their IDs for photo name badges. Thanks, crazy. Story 153. When I was a friend's parents built a new house. They left a hole in the wall of each bedroom, like a window without glass. Light and sound could easily get through. Story 154. I was always grounded around prom time. I missed out, and I was invited all 4 years of high school. I had a boyfriend junior and senior year. We could only go on dates if the sun was still out, because anything we wanted to do in the evening could be done in the daytime. I was not allowed to go to any of my friends' houses after school, ever. My parents had to meet all my friends before I could do anything with them or have them over. See what they did? No friends. I was very lonely in school. I was only allowed to talk on the phone for 10 minutes, and only before 8 p.m. My dad tried to make me have a 9 p.m. bedtime in high school. I could only take a 10-minute shower. If I was in there longer, my dad would bang on the bathroom door. Also, they tried to say I couldn't lock the bedroom door. I wasn't allowed to have a door lock, ever. Story 155. I was known as the bad kid for whatever reason in my neighborhood. The good family let me ride home with them from school one day. I offered their kids some Listerine breath strips. The paper-thin sheets of Listerine that you put on your tongue, mom goes straight to spit that out. What is that? Don't eat that. Made her kids spit it out, accused me of giving her kids acid. I was a 6th grader, and who the gives kids acid in front of their parents anyways? Her. Story 156. There is a mother at my kids' school who is irrationally overconcerned with her kids' eating habits, health, and most importantly, weight. Vegan, gluten-free, non-GMO, organic everything, no sugars, no sweets, anti-vaccination. They are the most emaciated, concentration camp-looking bunch of kids I've ever seen. She has kids in middle school, 12 to 13 years old, and sends them with a lunch containing nothing but a couple apple slices and maybe a half-dozen almonds. Not nearly enough food for an active kid. Story 157. My girlfriend's parents were the typical case of, if we don't like it, you don't get it. It did not seem like much that they forbid her watching cartoons or anime, and she was not allowed to wear revealing outfits except that she really loved cartoons and anime. Well, go figure. But still to this day, there is constant fighting where she would turn on some Disney film and they get mad, and she gets mad, and I sit in the back and play some Smash on my DS. Future parents. If you want your children to really get into something, just tell them they can't pee. Story 158. My mom was very protective when I was a young lad, and I thought she was overprotective until I was older. And she explained that since she worked for Ofsted and healthy schools, she knew exactly where every person on the offenders list was in my area, seen the info, was legit. Story 159. I used to hang out with this girl and her mom would have to go everywhere with her. We were in high school at this point. She came to my house for my birthday. I think we were 16 or 17. She lives like 7 blocks from me in a safe town. Well, she was at my house maybe 20 minutes, and her mom called and said she was coming to get her LOL. If we went to the mall, her mom would be walking 5 feet behind us, whereas my parents or my friends' parents would just drop us off for a few hours to shop. We went to a cafe once. Again, we were older. Her mom drove like 6 of us there. My friend goes outside for a minute and comes in all bugged out. He asked the girl why her mom was sleeping in the car in her bathrobe. It was bizarre. Story 160. As a kid, I wasn't allowed to read or watch almost anything. Harry Potter I remember sticking out the most because of the whole witchcraft thing. Later, when I was probably 19 or so and my mom had calmed down a bit, I asked her why I wasn't allowed to watch Harry Potter as a child, and she legitimately, but in more words, told me, children are impressionable, and I might think witchcraft was A-okay, and that can lead to things like thinking gay marriage is okay. I don't talk to my mom often. Story 161. Ugh, my own mom was horrible about this. Not the worst I've ever seen heard of, but the worst out of anyone I know personally. I've talked about this somewhat before. From the time I was a small child until I was 13, my mom was a Jehovah's Witness. She's also incredibly narcissistic, an alcoholic, and emotionally unstable. I was an only child raised in a very paranoid, fear-the-stranger-danger mindset, in which I was hardly ever allowed to leave the house, except to go to school. My only reprieve was the summers I stayed with my grandma, who basically let me run wild, unbeknownst to my mom. Oddly enough, my grandma was the baptized JW, while my mom was apparently just following to appease her. I was not allowed to go outside of my own yard until I was 13. The only exception was to ride my bike to one friend's house who lived down the street, and as soon as I got there, I had to call from their house to let my mom know I was safe. When I was 13, I was finally allowed to ride my bike to and from school. I was not allowed to watch Disney movies because they contained magic, which is considered a tool of Satan. I was specifically not allowed to watch Ninja Turtles or Power Rangers because they promoted violence, and any other cartoons or shows that contained martial arts actions or violence were out. My list of things I could watch was limited to Nat Geo, Mr. Rogers, and cartoons on Nickelodeon. However, my parents let me watch Tremors and Jurassic Park when I was a kid, which was really confusion because they were traumatically gory to my incredibly sheltered mind. I could pretty much watch whatever I wanted at Grandma's, though. I wasn't allowed to have juices that weren't 100 juice or any kind of cereals with sugar. My mom would not let me brush my own teeth until I was 12, and even then she would force me to stand there while she flossed my teeth and scraped at them with a dental pick. However, she allowed me copious amounts of coffee, with a ridiculous amount of creamer and as much soda as I wanted. I still can't make sense of this. My mom was incredibly strict about the things I owned and paranoid about subliminal messages. At one point, she tore my bedroom apart and forced me to throw away everything I owned with a peace sign or a yin-yang because they were considered blasphemous. The peace sign was apparently a cross with broken arms intended to mock Jesus, and the yin-yang suggested that there could be no good without evil, which wasn't true, because Jehovah could only be good. She would read my diary and walk into my bedroom without knocking. She made me shower with her until I was 12 or 13. She picked out my outfits for me and would not even let me choose what I wanted to wear when she took me school shopping. She did my hair the way she wanted it. For the longest time, I was bullied over my clothes because she dressed me like a moron with riding boots, spandex tights, and heavy animal print sweaters with tassels. The only choices I ever really had were school supplies, and which Happy Meal I wanted when she didn't feel like cooking, which was basically every night. I was not allowed to eat foods that she didn't personally like because she would pick off of my plate and eat my food if I didn't eat fast enough. She forced me to eat foods that she liked and I didn't, not because I wasn't eating my vegetables or whatever, but because she couldn't understand why I didn't like them and believed she could force me to. Also, no boys, period. I had one friend that was a boy in middle school, junior high, and she would eavesdrop on our incredibly seldom phone calls. I was not allowed to go anywhere with friends without an adult present until I was 13.